It's showtime.
Okay! Tokyo! South America! Australia! Germany! Africa!
Here we go. Head on with Bob Kincaid. 3 hours of conversation, cussin' and a discussin' with America's only born and bred Southern liberal talk host. Head on with Bob Kincaid is brought to you each night by Coal River Mountain Watch. Coal River Mountain Watch invites you to become part of the solution, part of a sustainable future, part of the uprising against mountaintop removal. Coal River Mountain Watch, crmw.net. And now, from high in the hills of beautiful West Bicod, Virginia, here's Bob Kincaid on the Head On Radio Network.
Well, howdy. And here we go, off and running for this 31st day of March 2020. March is going out like a lion. Or maybe a tiger. I keep hearing about Tiger King. I'm supposed to watch it on Netflix. Yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't know. that was an unpaid product placement for Netflix, by the way. Hi, I'm Bob, and it is Trumptanic Tuesday. Full speed ahead into that big, fantastic iceberg. There's 38 million icebergs out there, and we're going to ram them. Right. Yeah. This program exists on your generosity and your determination that it continue to operate for these 16-plus years. And every program at the Horn begins with gratitude. This program is no different. So thanks go out yesterday evening. I didn't see it till after the program was over. Thank you, Paula. Thank you very, very kindly indeed. Paula's note said simply, well, where'd it go? Sometimes the interface is funny that way. So I really love you. So sorry it's been so long since I've sent you some cash. Just got our tax refund. Thanks for all you do. Thank you, Paula. Thank you so very much indeed for helping to keep everything on the air. This is a fundraising free day. And that is magnificent. And it's also, being the last day of the month, well, this is when we thank the Patreon subscribers. Thank you very kindly, each and every one of you who over at Patreon helped keep the program on the air. That means thanks to Terrace out in California. Thank you to Brother Deacon Asa. Thank you to Nick. Thank you to Horst over in Taiwan. Thank you to Scott in Wisconsin. Thank you to Hamilton. Thank you to Alex. Thank you to Ruth, to Lori, to James, to Brock. Thanks to John, to Barb, Dave, Annette, Jeremy in Vermont, Ron, Carl, Hung Like Jesus, Vernon, Aaron, Joey, Andrea, Jeff, Baltimore Bob, Michael of the Guffins, John, Oak. Thank you, Oak. In California. Thank you very kindly. Thank you to Andrew. Thank you to Steve in New York. Thank you to Fab. Thank you to Albert in North Carolina. Thank you to Brendan. Thank you to Marty, to Glenn, to Joanne, Alec, Kay, James, Bernice. Thank you to our pal, the Nubian, in California. Thank you to John, Kat in Ohio, Dave, Joyce, Mark, and Robin. Thank you all so much for being Patreon subscribers and being partial sponsors of the program. Thank you so very much indeed. So this is, I feel like I'm really excited. Not that I'm not excited. I just sit around waiting for 5 p.m. to get here and read everything I can get my hands on. Pretty much every day. It's a socially distant kind of job in the first place. But this morning, I reached out to a dear friend of mine and asked him if he would come on and help us clear away a little bit of the viral fog so that we can have a better understanding of how this COVID-19 virus behaves in the natural world. And so that'll happen, in about 10 minutes or so. We're going to be joined by Dr. Michael McCawley, a member of the faculty at West Virginia University, as well as being a world-renowned expert on particulate matter, aerosols, and the impacts on public health that they have. Because, well, the transmission appears to be aerosol-based, and that's often the case with respiratory diseases. Like I said, we'll be talking in about 10 minutes or so. And if you want to, and I'll try to get questions to Dr. McCawley as you send them in. If you want to send emails to, you can use you can use mine, bobkincaid@gmail.com. You can send questions in that way. Or if you'd like to go over to headon.live and sign in to the merry, wacky, zany, real-time multimedia extravaganza that is the Horn Chat Room, well, you'll be greeted by Otto and Squeaky, early arrivers, and capably moderated by longtime inveterate, indefatigable veteran chat room moderator Sparky, who, being a third-stage guild navigator, has folded space to become man cave this evening. And he is, of course, capably assisted by pinch-hit midweek chat room utility moderator and all-around great guy, Steve from Georgistan. If you want to pop in there and maybe ask, I'll try to monitor the chat room and see your questions there as well. And the fact that I even know Dr. McCawley has everything to do with, in its own way, the fact that we hillbillies had to start learning about the impacts of particulate matter on respiratory health a lot of years ago. Because, well, those ultrafine particles that go up when the mountain gets blown up with those millions and millions of pounds of high explosives every day used on West Virginia and West Virginians and Appalachians. Well, those particulates are integral to understanding why this state, West Virginia, while we have not so many COVID cases yet, remain the single most vulnerable state in the United States in terms of the overall health of our citizenry. There can be health impacts from population density. We're seeing that in New York, and it is terrifying. But there are health impacts that come from what happens when a virus, an illness, invades an area that has already been laid out upon the sacrificial altar, as have the people of the state of West Virginia and Central Appalachia generally. I mentioned that T-shirt that went up for sale that I saw a week or so ago, had the outline of the state of West Virginia on it, and it said COVID-19 national champions socially distancing since 1863, and on the back it said, you stay in your holler and I'll stay in mine. And there's an element of grim gallows humor truth to that. Because we've been having, well, we've had a sort of a pandemic of industrial abuse for way more than 100 years now here. Over 100,000 people dead, thanks to the coal industry. And in many instances, that's black lung, that's particulate matter. Some of it's designated coal workers' pneumoconiosis in the legal language, in the medical language. Then there's silicosis, which we learned about to our horror with the drilling of the Hawk's Nest Tunnel, which up until Bhopal was the single greatest industrial accident in history. And, of course, the toll that toll was paid largely by the African-American community who worked to drill through the sandstone and then had their the wet spaces of their lungs turned into concrete by little tiny particles of silica. And then there's what we found out about mountaintop removal. The itsy-bitsy, teeny, tiny, little viral-sized particles of toxic glass go up into the air with the explosions. And people who can't see them don't even know they're breathing them, breathe them, and get very, very sick. Now, as I have noted, the sacrificial victims in the sacrifice zone don't get any mention when the issue of the vulnerability of West Virginia's population is brought up. Instead, people like Make West Virginia Great Big Old Governor Jim Justice says, now, we got a lot of hard-working West Virginians from hard-working industry. And I don't want anybody in any way, shape, form, or fashion to think that we're just a bunch of layabout hillbillies. But the people who never drew a check also die at shocking numbers. And so, as a consequence, people like my dear friend Bo Webb and I and others started learning about particulate matter 10, 11, 12 years ago. And Bo went so far as to co-lead a study of local residents, a survey, to see just how sick people were. Guess what? We're sick. And so that puts us at tremendously elevated risk. And as a result, I got to know Dr. McCawley and Dr. Michael Hendricks. And in particular, on a jaunt around northern Wisconsin one year, as we were trying to ring the alarm bells of particulates for a proposed mining operation up there by a now dead billionaire hillbilly who wanted to blast the bejesus out of northern Wisconsin using mountaintop removal style methods. Well, in the course of toddling around northern Wisconsin, I got a 2 or 3 day master class from Dr. McCawley in particulate matter. And in particular, see what I did there? Its impact on the respiratory, the pulmonary system, and how it behaves in the rest of the body. So I think this is going to be a genuinely informative conversation. And I hope you will find benefit in it. Because there's just so doggone much information out there, and there's really no clearinghouse for what's right or wrong. We know one individual that we absolutely can't trust anything he says. You and I both know who that is. And I mean, the business about he had a gotcha question already for Yamiche Alcindor when she asked him about per capita comparisons with here in South Korea, and COVID Caligula answered, "Do you even know how many people are in South Korea?" "I do. Do you?" 38 million. That's how many. That's a lot. That's a lot of people. And here in America,
We have a harder time testing because we have a lot of wide open spaces and farmland.
38 million people in Seoul, South Korea. Well, bust my buttons. Turns out that that was the elevation of Seoul above mean sea level, 38 m as in meters, not 38 million as in 38 million people in Seoul, South Korea. That's more like 8 or 9. I know. We'll get to all of that. But right now, I want to begin our conversation with Dr. McCawley. At present, and for the last several years, Dr. Michael McCawley has been the clinical associate professor at the WVU School of Public Health's Department of Occupational and Environmental Health. He holds a doctorate in environmental health from the Department of Environmental Medicine at New York University. His master's degree in engineering is from the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at West Virginia University. 27 years Dr. McCawley spent as a public health service officer with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention at the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. There, he focused on miners' health, silica exposure, silicosis, occupational respiratory disease, aerosol measurement, and diesel particles. Well, he retired from the U.S. Public Health Service in 2001, but along the way, he's, get this, worked on the toxicity of moon dust and asteroid dust. He's worked on beryllium exposure in nuclear weapons construction. But all along, air pollution, aerosols, and occupational health have been the chief recipients of his focus. Along the way, working on nuclear disarmament issues in Kazakhstan. He's done lung cancer research in China and heavy metals exposure in children and the health effects of the Marcellus Shale frack drilling. He sat on the Public Water Supply Study Commission here in West Virginia after the Freedom disaster. He sat on a federal commission to oversee government efforts to assist people harmed by the World Trade Center collapse, as well as at the National Academy of Science concerning the health effects of respirable coal mine dust exposure. He's authored over 60 peer-reviewed publications. He's been awarded the U.S. Public Health Service's Commendation Medal, 2 unit citation medals, and a Foreign Service Medal, as well as the American Industrial Hygiene Association's David L. Swift Award for Outstanding Aerosol Paper of the Year, and the NIOSH Alice Hamilton Award for Engineering and Physical Sciences Research. So it is a distinct honor and pleasure to welcome to the program a man I also consider to be a good friend of mine, Dr. Michael McCawley. Mike, good evening. Thank you for taking time to be with us.
Good evening, Bob. I'm glad to be here. Nice to hear you.
Oh, it's great to talk to you, and I can't think of anybody that could shed more light on some of the issues that we're facing now than you, because, well, as I just shared with our community, you have long, broad, and deep understanding of the behavior of aerosols, and just to sort of get us started this evening, that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the transmission of COVID, are we not?
We are, exactly that. In fact, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, where I worked, did some studies looking at the size of the particles that come out of your mouth and your nose when you sneeze or when you cough. And that's some of the work that people are really relying upon now to decide what kind of measures they have to take to prevent the spread and to protect people. And particularly for using respiratory protection, the N95 masks that you hear people talking about, those are all certified by NIOSH, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, to be protective against the kind of particles that might be in the air.
Now,
so, yeah, it's quite salient.
When you say protective against, can we drill down into that a little bit, as to who in particular is protected by the masks?
Okay, so you have to be careful when people start talking about masks that you actually know what kind of mask they're talking about. So the N95 mask that you'll hear a lot of people talking about and are the masks that the doctors want to be wearing if they're dealing with patients are masks that prevent aerosols from getting into the wearer's lungs. And so they're protective. They're a dust mask. You see construction workers using them all the time if they're doing dusty kinds of things. You might see a coal miner occasionally have one on. Those kinds of respirators are supposed to protect the lungs by being highly efficient. And by highly, I mean 99.999% efficient at keeping out dust if they're worn correctly. And that's a big if.
I was about to say, how big is that if?
That's an enormous if. So, for example, there are rubber band kinds of things that hold the mask in place. Those have to be positioned in a very careful manner on your head. And in fact, actually, before you wear this kind of mask or any kind of respiratory protection, you're supposed to be fitted for it because not all faces have the same shape. Some are round, some are narrow, some are square. You have beards, and if you're going to wear respiratory protection, you can't have a beard. In fact, you probably should be shaving a couple of times a day because a leak as tiny as a single human hair is enough to really drop substantially the protection factor of those masks. So people who are wearing them, it's kind of a last resort. In fact, in the work that I did for occupational safety and health, we always said that personal protective equipment was the last stand defense you tried to use. So there were all sorts of things that should come before that, and that only in the very last analysis, if those things either weren't present or could possibly fail, then you should be using and relying upon personal protective equipment. You can always use it, but relying upon it when it's a matter of potentially life and death is something that you have to take seriously, and you have to make sure that that respirator has been placed properly on your face and kept like that. So you can't be moving it around. You can't be lifting it off to talk. I mean, that's really a standard sort of mistake that people make. When you put one of these over your face, your voice is muffled. And so you think, well, I have to be heard. So you lift it off your face. Well, there goes all your protection. So it's as if you didn't have one on, which, of course, if you're lifting it off your face, you don't. And that's that first kind of respiratory protection. The other thing that people talk about with masks are surgical masks. A surgical mask is basically a sneeze guard, just like the
shield over the salad bar.
Yeah, over the salad bar. Yeah, that's it. It's to prevent larger droplets that may come out in a cough or a sneeze from getting as airborne as effectively as they would normally do if you just sneezed out into the air.
So,
so that's to keep other people from getting sick.
And so, as between the N95 and a standard surgical mask, the N95 will provide protection for the individual wearing it, whereas a surgical mask is for the protection of people who are beyond the wearer of the mask. Is that basically it?
That's correct. And so you have to understand what those differences are. And both of these kinds of masks are, in fact, required if you're in a hospital setting, particularly, where there are people who have the disease. And they will be handing out masks on occasion in certain medical facilities to say, well, if you think you're sick, put one of these masks on. So what they're asking you to do is to essentially wear a sneeze guard. It's not there so much to protect you as it is to protect everybody else. Whereas the N95,
I was going to say, and
it's quite different.
The two are distinct in appearance.
They are.
You can tell one from the other. So let's say I go out to my local grocer's I'm engaging in social distancing and all of that, and I want to talk about that in a minute too. But I'm beginning to see people wearing surgical masks. You know, they're often blue. They've got the pleats. If those people think that they are being protected against inhaling COVID particles, are they?
For the most part, no. Technically, the surgical mask is not really considered protection. It is protection for the people that are around you from you when you're wearing it. So you're actually doing that to protect other people.
Okay, and so with having dealt with those two separate masking alternatives, let's talk about these particles themselves, if you don't mind.
Sure.
How big are they? Or how small, I guess, is a better way of putting it. They run
the gamut of sizes, yeah.
Yeah.
So when you sneeze, what comes out of your mouth and your nose, or when you cough, what comes out of your mouth and your nose. And even though, particularly when you cough, you may not be quite as aware of the fact that you are generating droplets into the air. You really are. That cough is very efficient at generating droplets. And so they range in size from a millimeter, perhaps at the largest, to micrometer size droplets, and potentially, after a few moments, even smaller. What happens when you sneeze or cough and you aerosolize these droplets, you suspend them in the air, is those droplets begin evaporating. And as they evaporate, they shrink. As they shrink, they become more lightweight, so they stay suspended in the air longer. So the things that we most worry about are the tiniest droplet sizes, because these are the ones that may have a fairly long lifetime in the air. They could be in the air for hours or even days. So that's one of those things that you worry about. And the viruses that are inside these droplets are tinier still. They are molecular size, really, the size of very large molecules. And so they're perhaps another 2 or 3 orders of magnitude smaller than the droplet. And so even though that droplet may shrink down to something few micrometers or even tenths of a micrometer in size, the viruses are smaller still and are still contained in that droplet and still may be virulent. They still may be capable of causing the disease if inhaled or if deposited on your skin surface somewhere and able to get into your mucous membranes.
Our mutual friend, Bo Webb, sent me an article from the Boston Globe earlier today that was contained information from an MIT researcher who says that it's quite possible that the 6-foot social distancing rule may not be an effective standard because it is based on really, really old transmission data, and that the distance between people might need to be even greater. Can you talk about that distance between people issue a little bit?
I can. Now, there's some difficulties in there, and of course, when you get a room full of scientists, if you have 10 scientists in a room, you'll have 11 opinions of what's right. Particularly for something like this that's fairly complex. And so one of the questions is, of course, what's the droplet size? If it's tiny enough, we know for certain that droplet can stay suspended for a very long time. And we know that because we've done a lot of air pollution studies, and the particles that we see in the air are able to travel continental-sized distances over the span of weeks and even months and stay suspended in the air. Probably the most infamous case of stuff staying suspended for a long time was when we did above-ground nuclear weapons testing back in the 50s and 60s. That blew a cloud of dust up into the higher parts of the atmosphere, and it's circulated all over the world and stayed suspended up there for months at a time. From all of the work that I did in industrial environments, we know that if a person's cutting something with a saw or grinding something, the dust that we see from that can stay suspended in the air and build up in the air over the course of days or even weeks in a workplace.
Now, what size are we talking about? You just mentioned the virus particles themselves can be
okay.
Well,
all right.
On
so
a molecular level,
idea.
But how much do they bounce around?
So an idea of what size something is this. The standard way of talking about this. Human hair is 100 micrometers thick. So a human hair is a very thin fiber, but it's 100 micrometers thick. The size droplet that we're talking about is probably less than 10 micrometers in size. That means you could stack anywhere from 10 to 100 of these up across the diameter of a human hair. And that's a 1 micrometer to a 10 micrometer range. They'll be in that range and smaller. They'll be a tenth of a micrometer in size. That means they're a tenth of a micrometer. You could stack 1,000 of them up across a human hair. Really tiny. The viruses, on the other hand, are 1/100th that size. So you could stack 100 virus particles up across a single 10 micrometer or 10th micrometer, size droplet. And that would be something really tiny and tinier still. So we're dealing on a scale that kind of boggles the mind. That's not something that we normally deal with unless we've got an electron microscope in front of us all day long. So it's really technically challenging to talk about these kinds of things. And the smaller the particle, the slower it settles out in the air. And that means 1 micrometer particle can take a very long time to settle, and so long, in fact, that just convection, currents of air in the room that you can't even feel, are sufficient to keep that particle suspended, kind of like people tossing around a balloon or a beach ball. It's the air currents are pumping it back up in the air, like at a football stadium where you see a beach ball going across the fans in the stadium, right? The air currents are like the fans pumping this thing back up again as it starts to fall out.
And so that takes into account not just the recirculatory qualities of HVAC systems inside buildings, but like you just said, something as prosaic as the convection current created by the warmth of a light bulb.
Correct. Yes. It does not take much energy to keep that suspended and keep it suspended for potentially a very long time. So, of course, what we try to do in areas where there's possible infection is we try to up the number of air exchanges in a room. And what that means is think of putting a cup of coffee under your faucet, okay? And if that cup of coffee has a little bit of coffee left in it and you run the faucet to clean out the cup, it takes you a while of filling up that cup continuously, letting it overflow before the water runs clear. And that's the kind of dilution that we're talking about. Usually anywhere from 3 to 10 air changes is what you want to see to get concentrations diluted enough that you don't worry about them. Which brings us to the other difficulty in terms of predicting what good social distancing is. One of the things that we're not completely aware of with COVID-19 is what concentration is sufficient to cause infection. And part of the reason for that is this is a new virus. We don't have a lot of background information on it, number one. And number two, how much it takes to infect a person is really not only a function of how virulent, how really transmissible that virus is, but also how prone a person is, how good their immune system is. So that's why we're also worried about people with slightly compromised and horrendously compromised immune systems. So if you have a disease that uses an immune system reaction, and lots of chronic diseases that people have will in fact overuse the immune system to react, diabetes being one of them, in fact, then their immune system is already overtaxed, and putting in something else, like a virus, will now overbear the abilities of that immune system to fight things off. And so the virus can spread and do damage. And in fact, what the immune system can do is then try to go into overdrive. When it goes into overdrive, then it starts attacking the body itself. And that's why you hear about these pneumonias. And pneumonia is simply your lungs overreacting to what they perceive as an infection in your body, producing mucus, which fills up the lung, which drowns you and eventually kills you. So essentially, you're killing yourself.
Your body is killing yourself. Yeah.
Your body is killing itself. Yes.
We've got a little. I've got a little confusion. Flavio in Wisconsin. Heard you mention the cloud of nuclear dust earlier, and he says, aren't these two different things? Nuclear particles versus viral particles. Nuclear particles in terms of half-life and so forth, but aren't they apples and oranges?
No, not in terms of the size. Actually, when we talk about particles and dust particles, really the first thing we talk about from a toxicological standpoint is what's the size of a particle. And so really when we compare particles and what will stay suspended, it doesn't, you don't have to talk about the half-life of the radioisotope, for example, at first. But what you are talking about is the relative size of that particle. And so the dust that got ejected into the stratosphere was tiny dust. And these are tiny particles inside tiny droplets. So on a size-by-size basis, that's the comparison. How long will something stay suspended, not how long it stays virulent. That's something to consider as well with the droplet, because if the virus stays in the droplet, it can prolong its lifetime. If it dries out, the thinking is that eventually the virus will desiccate and essentially fall apart. To say die is probably a misnomer. These are not living things, viruses. These are clumps of chemicals, really, that kind of act like they're living things, but aren't truly alive. So they're not like bacteria, which are life forms. These are inanimate objects that have the chemical ability to go into a cell and make the cell do things that reproduce more of those chemicals, which then attack the next cell.
Yeah, by way of a comparison, and this goes back to things that you have told me and others in the past, obviously an ultrafine particle of silica is not alive.
Mm-hmm.
It is merely, under that aforementioned scanning electron microscope, it's a tiny little piece of razor sharp jagged glass. And,
exactly.
And it wreaks havoc on in the cell without ever having to be alive, radioactive. It is merely its, I guess, platonic ideal existence that does the damage.
It's you can essentially consider it a toxic chemical. So if you were to drink arsenic's not alive. It's an element, in fact. And so it would kill you nonetheless because it's a poison. And you can think of viruses almost in the same way as being poisons of sorts. They're just...
They rewrite the source code inside the cell.
They do, yes. and because the source code is written in chemicals. And so one chemical can command another chemical. It's all about reactions. A cell is a bag of chemical reactions when you get right down to it.
So let's talk a little bit about origins here, because you also you did research in China, and
Yep.
and you had a chance to see up close and personal some years back what that how that society was functioning. Are you satisfied with the drop of bat pee landing on the scaly anteater that eventually gets consumed somehow by a human being hypothesis of how this enters the human, makes the jump from other animals to humans?
Well, yeah, let's talk about viruses for a minute. Viruses basically are chemicals that are playing the odds. And they play the odds by essentially replicating in the trillions and quadrillions and enormously. And so they rely upon chance to give them a new lease on life, if you will. So these things may arise in something like a bird, for example. And in the bird, they may not be infected to humans. They don't mesh with the human system. But they're only a small number, relatively speaking, billions, but small from chemical standpoint, of possible combinations that you have in this virus. And you change one of those little combinations of things, of protein molecules, and now it becomes infected for humans. And it's an odds. It's rolling the dice. Well, you roll the dice enough, the odds will eventually come up your way. It's the old example that I've used when I teach statistics, that if you put 1 million monkeys at typewriters and leave them there long enough typing randomly, eventually one will come up with a play by Shakespeare. The time that it takes is pretty large, but you up the number of monkeys to trillions as you do with the number of viruses, and eventually they get lucky and it makes the jump. What I know about China, in fact, actually, when I was in China, I was in Wuhan in 1988. So I've actually been where the source of this is. The markets have live animals. The Chinese that I met with then, of course, China has become a lot more prosperous than it was in 1988 on an individual basis. But they didn't have really large refrigerators. And so you went to the market every day. You picked up a live chicken. You brought the chicken home. You cut off its head. You plucked it. And you ate it for dinner. And so there's an availability of sources because a lot of these are bird viruses that you can have that jump made, and there's an available human being there to make the jump to. So it's a matter of chance, but like they say in Jurassic Park, life always finds a way.
And so with some of these animals that may have been the originators of these of this particular virus, is there not a possibility that, say, in the bat in question, and bats are notoriously pathogenic. You don't want to live with bats. But
right.
Is there an evolutionary or a Darwinian possibility that virus served a purpose in that bat? And that, I suppose there's no way of knowing, is there?
Well, the purpose is, from a Darwinian standpoint, the purpose is for the virus. I know it's hard to think of a non-animate object having purpose, but in fact, chemicals react, and there's a purpose in the chemical reacting. So you put ammonia in chlorine bleach, and you get a chlorine gas out of it. Well, that reaction is there because chemicals react, because thermodynamics works the way thermodynamics works because the universe works the way the universe works. So we're a structured system, and everything is kind of related to everything else. It's all a part of a whole. So, yeah, to say there's purpose to it, you're treading a fine line between theology and science.
Oh dear, I decidedly want to stay away from theology.
Yeah,
but all that being the case, I mean, there are numerous coronaviruses that didn't do this.
Yep.
And all these words are fraught when we talk about a virus, but we talk about purpose or whatever. But virulence is not one of those fraught words. It either does what it does or it doesn't. And in this case,
Correct.
It is virulent. And in order to be, and this is one of those fraught words, successful, a virus mustn't kill everything and everyone, or else it eventually winds up being a non-player.
Yep.
So one of the things, Dr. McCawley, that we heard especially early on, and we're still hearing, and I think to our detriment, is some kind of comparison between this COVID-19 virus and flu. Is that a fair comparison, or is that a useful comparison?
It has a lot of utility in that they're both viruses, first of all, and we're a lot more familiar with influenza and what influenza does and how it works. And we also know that some of the chemical structure of the COVID virus and some of the chemical structure of the influenza virus are very similar. There are only so many tools in the virus's toolbox, but it's still a very large number of tools in its toolbox that it has for finding its way in the world. And essentially that's what we're seeing here, something that's finding its way in the world, and it's got some of the same tools in its toolbox that influenza does. And so there's some utility in looking at that because we know how to fight influenza. And so we can apply the principles that we use for influenza to COVID, the same way that the COVID virus can use the principles of influenza that it shares in common to make its own way in the world. So it's kind of a fighting fire with fire, fighting a knowledge that we have of how viruses of this type work against the virus working that way.
Is part of the virulence because it's new?
Yes, absolutely. So what you've got is a naive population, if you will. That's the technical term, people who have not been exposed to this before. So, for example, when Europeans first came to the Americas, they brought with them all sorts of infectious agents that killed off a lot of the native population that weren't harming the Europeans coming here at all, because they had been exposed to them over the course of, and what you had was a survivor population.
And so
survivor population was unaffected by it because they had built up immunity to it. That's the way the immune system works. If it's seen it before, it builds up immunity. So eventually the virus loses some of its virulence. It loses some of its ability to hop from person to person because the immune system says, "Oh, I know you. I've seen you before. Bring out the hammer. Bang. You're gone."
Is it reasonable to expect that the COVID will follow that trajectory as well?
Oh, absolutely. It's a foregone conclusion that it's going to for most people. We haven't got the proof of it yet. Now that's the other part of this, that we have to be careful in comparing it to influenza. It isn't influenza exactly. So it's not the same virus that we've seen before. So we do have to be careful that we don't make assumptions that are wrong. It's easy enough to say, oh, this is just like influenza. We'll treat it like influenza. When it gets warm outside, it'll go away. Maybe, maybe not. We don't know. We haven't seen it before. Science is about learning from experience as well as postulating in theory.
Now, my next question, one of the first people to mention this from a governmental standpoint, at least inside the Congress, was a senator from Arkansas by the name of Tom Cotton. And he announced some weeks back that he was disturbed about it. But, of course, he had to mix in a little bit of paranoia. And with no evidence whatsoever suggested that this might be a bioweapon that had gotten loose from a lab in China. Can you address exactly how unhelpful that is?
Okay. Well, let me draw a line between science and politics. As a politician, you can suppose all sorts of things. And as a scientist, you can suppose all sorts of things. But before you make announcements as a scientist, you have to have proof.
Politicians don't.
So, and politicians don't. Nope. So that's the difference. And you have to be careful that you don't make politics your science. You don't make science your politics.
So is there, is there any way to tell when you look at something like this, is there any way to tell if it has been manipulated in a lab?
Weaponized?
Yeah, weaponized. There's the word.
Yeah. Well, actually, weaponized probably is not quite the right word, but is there a way? In theory, possibly. In practice, because unless what they've done is something that's something similar to something you've done before, what you're doing is it's kind of like to build one of these viruses. It's kind of like taking Lego blocks and putting them all together. So nature puts the Lego blocks together at random and makes billions of different attempts at randomly constructing these Lego blocks. The scientists will make, if they were building a virus, would make a very specific looking structure to the Lego. But in fact, they could come up with exactly the same thing that nature came up with. And you'd never be able to tell the difference in that particular case.
I asked the question, Mike, because I worry about the ability of people to panic and to use faulty reasoning to come to deadly conclusions.
Sure.
And the more I hear of that,
that's why you can't. Yeah, that's why you can't mix politics and science very well together. You have to be very careful about drawing lines and say, what is it we know? What is it we don't know? If you're doing that, that's science. If you're saying, what can we suppose here?
That's politics.
And you're creeping over into politics. Yeah.
So can you talk, we touched on it briefly, but can you talk a little bit about the physics of the ballistics of the particles? And, we talked before this call, we talked a little bit, going from the Newtonian stuff to the next level stuff of the particle behavior upon ejection.
Yeah. Okay, so let's look at what happens when you spit out one of these particles, because essentially that's what we're talking about here. When you cough or you sneeze, you're essentially spitting out these particles. So they come out with a certain velocity, and they're really tiny. Now, you would think, if I start off with a cannonball, I can throw it so far, but not very far. If I get down to something the size of a baseball, well, I can throw that a lot farther, right? And so when we get down to these little tiny droplets, I should be able to throw those forever and ever, and they should just go forever and ever, and that's not right. Because the laws of physics that Newton used to describe the trajectory of a bullet or the trajectory of a baseball or the trajectory of a cannonball are different than the laws of physics that are used to describe the trajectory of one of these 1 or 2 or 3 micrometer droplets, size droplets. So the godfather of trajectories and ballistics for bullets and cannonballs is Isaac Newton. The godfather for tiny particles is a guy named Stokes. And his equations are different than Newton's equations. You try to apply Newton's equations. So what happens is when you spit these things out, if they're a few micrometers in size, they travel almost nowhere. They don't go very far at all. So you think, we're safe. They're not going very far from that trajectory. But now they're caught in the wind, and they go where the air goes. And so they're not being impelled any farther. You can't sneeze across the room very well. You may be able to spit across the room, but you can't sneeze across the room. You can't sneeze these droplets because what you're spitting and you're hocking a loogie, you know, maybe you can get that across the room, but not a droplet. And it's going to get caught up in the airstream because it's so tiny. And that's because there's resistance in the air when you move this particle. And so the size of the particle counts. And the smaller it gets, the less far it's going to go from the first impulse that you give it. But the longer it's going to stay in the air and the longer it's going to travel and the farther away it's going to move just by these convective currents in which it's suspended. So we talk about the droplets being suspended in air. And usually I teach a course in aerosol physics. And aerosols are particles suspended in air. To be an aerosol, you pretty much have to be 20 micrometers and smaller. Stuff bigger than 20 micrometers tends to fall out of the air pretty fast. But stuff less than 20 micrometers tends to get in the air and just stay suspended for a long time and move around. And so that's why we have to worry about that 6-foot distance, particularly if you're in a closed room. If you're outdoors and you're 6 feet away from somebody, there's a lot more air currents moving things around and away and diluting things. So being 6 feet away from a person outdoors has probably a much lower probability of infection with it than being in a closed room with somebody 6 feet away. Same distance away, different probability of perhaps encountering whatever they've coughed or sneezed into the air. And it's all because of the size of these droplets once they start evaporating down.
So you may have seen,
tiny.
The
evaporation occurs really quickly.
So you may have seen the story yesterday about the preacher in Tampa who was finally arrested for endangering public health and violating an unlawful assembly. His defense inside his megachurch, and it has 4,000 members, is that sure, they went ahead and held services, but they observed social distancing guidelines with families 6 feet apart from other families. It sounds to me, since that was not an open-air tent revival or anything like that, that, it was inside the megachurch. That doesn't sound like much of a defense based on what you're telling me, Doc.
Yeah, I'm afraid that's true, and there's one other problem as well with that 6-foot distancing. That 6-foot distancing assumes that you're not going to come in contact with the surfaces that there might be infected people coming in contact with. So once you sneeze, you're going to get it on you. Once you get it on you, you're going to get it on surfaces. And it's going to remain virulent, active on that surface for a while. So if they're sitting in pews and they're rubbing their hands along the pew rail, you can pick it up off of surfaces. So there are different methods of transmission. One is in the air, and the other is off of surfaces. And the reason why I know so much about this is because I did a whole bunch of study on this stuff called beryllium. And there was a big problem with beryllium exposure. Beryllium is element number 4 in the periodic table. It is a metal. And people who are exposed to it get a lung disease that's exactly like tuberculosis. It causes a granuloma in the lungs if you inhale it into your lungs. And the problem was they took the air concentrations lower and lower and lower by putting more and more air into the room where the workers were working. And they never managed to decrease the rate of disease. And the secret that we finally figured out and solved was that it was not the stuff that was in the air that they were breathing into their lungs initially that made them sick. It was the stuff they got on their skin, off of surfaces. And once these people started wearing gloves, long sleeve shirts, protecting their skin, wearing masks and face shields, looking a lot like the government is telling people you need to look if you're going to be around somebody who's sick, suddenly the disease rate went to 0. It was effective. And so if you're going to put people together, particularly in a closed environment where they're sharing space, not just keeping distance, you have to worry about surfaces, because surfaces can be just as effective. And we could see that. We could measure it on people's skin when we started taking skin samples, wipes off of the skin.
Can you?
And we could find beryllium everywhere.
Can you offer a working definition for what I see words pop into the sort of zeitgeist, and I'm reading now and hearing now about viral shedding among people who may be asymptomatic. What is that?
So if you have viruses, they are in the cells in your body, and they will be in the fluids in your body eventually. Because what happens is the virus gets into a cell, it takes over the cell's energy mechanism, and directs the cell to reproduce viruses. And then it uses an enzyme in the cell that the cell can make to break the cell open and escape from the cell. And when it escapes, it's in the fluids of your body. And so everything's connected inside your body. And the connection means that it's in the fluids. You can find it potentially on the surface of your body. So it makes its way to the surface. It may make its way to the surface because you rub your eye and there's fluid in your eye. Now it's on your finger. Now it's on the table you just touched with that contaminated finger. Now it's on another person's clothes because you just touched them. Viral shedding just means the virus is coming off of you. Think of Pigpen and his cloud of dust, right?
Right.
Well, human beings walk around in a cloud of biological material surrounding them. And that cloud of biological material surrounding them is shared with all of those around them. And so being in the vicinity of other human beings or coming in contact with surfaces that other humans have come in contact with brings this off. And while we weren't seeing the same sort of thing with beryllium, we were seeing it get on people's skin and then move to other surfaces. So it was migrating out of the work area where they were working with the actual beryllium to cover the entire plant. Areas that the workers hardly went into ever. would be highly contaminated with the beryllium, because it apparently did not take much on their skin to just contaminate the surface and to be found that way. The same thing is going to be true of these viruses. We were talking about a metal in the other case. We're talking about a protein here. Chemicals are chemicals. It's just chemical contamination coming off you. And it's exuding off of you and exuding onto other surfaces. That's viral shedding. Sneezing is another way. Coughing is another way for viral shedding to come out.
Yeah, when I see that participle shedding, I think of a golden retriever or a long-haired cat. Cats in particular. If you've got a cat, you've got stuff with cat hair everywhere, even places the cat wasn't.
Yeah.
So this really is that.
It is that. It is that. It's chemicals being shed off your body.
So I've got my spray bottle of 10% bleach solution. I've got, I think I got the last two things of Clorox wipes that were available in southern West Virginia, maybe. And if I have to go out, everything gets wiped down. How effective is that?
Well, I can tell you with beryllium was really hard to clean up. It was so hard to clean up that the families of the workers all got beryllium disease because the workers brought it home with them. And even if they came in the door, shed their clothes at the door, and the wife put the clothes, or the husband put the clothes in the washing machine immediately right there at the door, and everybody still got exposed. So in terms of effective, it's better than doing nothing. It's not as good as never going out. And that's why everybody's saying, if you don't have to go out, don't go out. Cleaning the stuff up, you can't see it. How do you know you got it? You're cleaning up an invisible enemy that you conceivably can hide in every nook and cranny of your house. When we found beryllium in the seat cushions of the chairs where people had sat. And when we poofed on the seat cushion, we got a cloud of beryllium dust coming up. We know from that you can get a cloud of viral particles coming up. They're chemicals. It's just chemicals.
But something like a bleach solution, you mentioned that the virus is a protein. The bleach does dissolve the proteins.
It does. Okay. Absolutely. It does. As long as it gets on the protein. The trick is making sure you get it on the protein.
So earlier,
let's go back to your dog hair or cat hair. You clean up your house after the dog or cat's been around, right? And you still find hairs.
Yeah.
So the hairs at least are visible. The viruses aren't. So the best advice is, if you don't have to go out, stay the hell home.
What does the next step from that then is, you mentioned developing immunities and the immune system recognizing the virus and things like that. What is there a time frame that attaches to that? Because everybody wants to know when the social distancing is going to end. Here in West Virginia, we're a week into it tonight, and yet you would think we had been doing it for a month of Sundays.
Yeah.
People are getting a little stir crazy.
Yeah.
And we are social primates, and we like to be around other members of our happy little hairless baboon troop. And we know it's not possible now, but how long? Is there any way of knowing that?
Yeah, until the rates go down. until the rates go down, and you have to wait for the epidemiologists who are measuring the rates and the folks like me who are out there collecting information on who's infected and how many people are infected where to tell you when it's safe to go back in the water. You'll listen to the lifeguards, and that's what these people are. Think of your local epidemiologist as your lifeguard. No running by the pool, no going back in the water till you've waited your time after lunch, or else you're going to drown. That's the rule here. Listen to the lifeguards. They are guarding your life, and they're doing it because they know what they're doing. This is not something that's unknown to people who are in public health. We study this all of the time. This is kind of a standard scenario for us. And just the week before all of this happened, I was lecturing on quarantines in my public health class, Public Health 101. I'm talking about quarantines. And I said, quarantines are a terrible thing to have to go to because nobody wants to abide by them. Nobody, nowhere, regardless of the disease. My colleagues from NIOSH were in Africa fighting Ebola. They had to post guards outside of people's houses who had Ebola with threats to shoot them on sight if they came out of the house. Because even in the midst of something as horrendous as an Ebola epidemic, and when people get Ebola, you know that these are really sick people because they're bleeding from every pore in their body. And they die quickly. And death is everywhere. And still people are thinking, well, this is not going to happen to me. I'm going to go out. And you have to threaten with shooting them, essentially, to keep them home.
Well, I don't know.
This is not as bad as that. But
I don't know if you saw it, but I'll send you the link after the program. The piece is older now, but one of the first worldwide journalism outfits to do a look at the virus when it was sweeping through Wuhan and Hubei province was the Australian Broadcasting Corporation and a program of theirs called Four Corners. And so this is legitimate journalism. This isn't, Alex Jones or anything like that. And the visuals they had were chilling, Dr. McCawley, chilling. People being dragged from their homes and stuffed in vans and driven away. Even more so, people literally being welded into their homes by the authorities.
I saw some of that footage, and that's what they had to do. Because people's reaction to quarantine is so bad. I don't know if you're familiar with the story of Typhoid Mary. Mm-hmm. Back in the late 1800s, this lady was a cook and was a carrier for typhus. And food was one of the main transmission vectors for typhus. And as a cook, she was infecting everybody. So they had to lock her away on an island off of Manhattan. And she escaped several times. Every time they'd lock her up, she'd go, oh, okay, I won't do this again. She'd be back right at it within another week, killing off other people. There's no accounting for human nature except under law. And that's why we have laws. And so people have to say, this is by law that we're doing this. You can't go out. Understand what can't means? You can't do it. You can't be out somewhere.
So here in West Virginia, we are in a under a stay-at-home order, but it's rather civ-like when you get right down to it.
Yeah.
Because it seems that there are more exceptions than rules.
Right.
And yet we are supposedly, if you look at some of the data in gatherings, we're getting it closer to right than wrong. What does that mean? And of course, I mentioned before you called in, I mentioned how vulnerable the population of West Virginia is. probably the most vulnerable,
Absolutely.
the most vulnerable population in the United States, based on what's already been done to us. But we're trying. I mean, I give credit where credit's due. I'm not a Jim Justice fan, but he's making an effort. But what about the states that absolutely refuse to make an effort? The website that I look at, Dr. McCawley, is covidactnow.org. I've been telling people about this for a while, getting to go look, be active, take action in your own states, your own communities. And throughout the Confederacy, for instance, with the exception of Virginia and North Carolina, these are all states that have voluntary social distancing plans. And the statistical predictions that this website is giving are deaths in the tens and sometimes hundreds of thousands of people if they persist in that behavior. How, from a public health standpoint or an epidemiological standpoint, how do you get it through to people? I mean, you just gave us the example of the people that we have this. I don't know. Maybe it's a suicide gene somewhere down inside us. That okay, well, they're going to die, but I'm not. How do you break through that?
Yeah.
At some point, are more stringent measures going to be necessary?
First of all, let's be realistic. It's the people who say they're going to die, but I'm not. They're probably right. The point is that they're the ones killing them. And we should treat people who don't obey this order as people attempting murder. I'm a fairly militant public health person, and I think we call it the way it is. If you're infective and you go out, you should be treated just like somebody who's going out firing an automatic weapon into a crowd of people. You should be charged with attempted murder.
What does...
And these people, as I recall, the South was the one who were suggesting anybody with HIV should be locked up, right?
Yes. In the Bible Belt, sure.
And, well, so that's no more infective than is someone who's going out sneezing. It's nothing to sneeze about. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Lock them all up.
To what extent? To what extent is our profoundly bad attempt at testing going to yield one outcome or another in this?
Well, the testing, the use of the testing, first of all, is to answer the question you asked just a little while ago. How do we know when it's safe to come back out again? We got to do that testing. And so that's a different test.
The antigen or antibody test is a different test from the active virus test. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is.
I've had it, but I'm well is a different test than I've got it.
Exactly. But if you know the rate of infection, which the antibody test will tell you, and as well as any other test that you do, if you know that rate of infection, you know when things are leveling off. Because as it goes back to zero again, then the reservoir is drying up. So you can get at it both ways. It's most effective to get a blood test and say, I have antibodies for this. Now, that tells you a lot more. But it's just as good to say, we were able to detect the virus. Almost as good to say. So when you can't detect the virus anymore, then you can start letting people back out again. But you have to continue testing after that. You can't stop the testing right then. because this can spring back up. If there are reservoirs of it somewhere in the population, you have to know about that because it's like a wildfire. If there are hot spots still, you got to go out and hose them down. You have to isolate them.
More and more, I'm seeing people say, I got real sick last January, a couple of months back, and I had my flu shot, and I've never been sick like I was sick in January. And I'm hearing that from all over the country.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? What do you think the possibilities are that this? And if I'm getting Alex Jonesy, say so and forgive me. But given the not great response, especially early on, what are the chances that it has been here since before we actually started counting numbers? It has to have, doesn't it?
No, not necessarily. If, big if, we're correct as to where this started and the way it started, and to have a virus arise at multiple points simultaneously is probabilistically nil. So usually with a virus that's jumping species like that, there's a point at which it starts. There's a patient zero.
Right, and I acknowledge,
and everybody is reasonably sure that patient zero was in Wuhan.
Right, and this is in the nature of my inquiry. Patient zero is somebody in Wuhan. Wuhan is a city of some 11 million of human beings with significant commercial ties to the United States. If we take as a given that, and we know, and I'm trying to go through this as much as in orderly a fashion as my mind will let me, because I sort of lack the expertise. But if we know patient zero is in Wuhan, and we know that the first doctors who identified something new and bad happening were immediately suppressed by the Chinese government, to the point that the first guy who actually identified it is now dead. He was threatened, he was suppressed, he was silenced, and we know that that's all happening around the first part of December. Well, that there's an incubation period. So whatever that date they identify that, you have to go back as far as the incubation period, do you not? So we're probably in November. And then you think about the commercial ties between the United States and China that were not at all impacted. So you got products possibly with stuff on them. You got people doing that shedding. You've got asymptomatic people, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, day in, day out. The lots of flights between China and the United States. That's why I asked the question, Dr. McCawley, what is the chance that it was here before we knew it was here?
So if it was here before we knew it was here, you'd see an epidemic. Because this stuff is going into a naive population. And there's no way to stop an epidemic in a naive population if you don't know what it is. So you'd see epidemic levels of pneumonias, pretty much of deaths from pneumonia. We've not seen epidemic levels of deaths from pneumonia. So you have to draw the conclusion that there wasn't an epidemic going on. Particularly an unknown epidemic. An unknown epidemic is still a known because it's going to cause the deaths, and we're going to be counting deaths. And we didn't count them. We didn't see that. I mean, you could have attributed the deaths to something else, but it's still pneumonia deaths, and there was no epidemic of pneumonia deaths at that time. Could it be part of the epidemic of influenza pneumonia deaths that you might see? Could be. That would be another chancy kind of thing that would happen. So barring some unlikely probabilities, it probably didn't.
Okay.
But you can't say for sure, absolutely 100%. Could it have made its way, and could there have been people who got the disease, died off quickly, and never transmitted it? Yeah, maybe, but what's the point?
Yeah.
That wasn't an epidemic. So,
well, I guess
did we have an epidemic of pneumonias? We didn't. So, not above the background rate, the endemic rate of disease. So we keep track of the endemic rate. And one of the things that the epidemiologists look for on a regular basis is any spike in the endemic rate of a number of diseases. And pneumonia is a big one for that because of influenza.
And part of the reason I ask all of this, you're a West Virginian just like I am. Eventually, Jim Justice got around to saying, we know it's here, we just haven't found it. This was on the same day that Trump was saying Jim Justice is doing a great job because they don't have it. And then the very same day we identified our first case.
Yeah.
What are the chances?
Yeah, well, now that so the chances are it's here, it's in the state, and it's probably making its way from the borders inward because we're surrounded by states that are having outbreaks of this. But it's an exponential rise. So one of the hallmarks of an exponential rise is it starts off slowly. And you know you've got an epidemic only when it hits the truly exponential growth of rates because what's happening is the rate is beginning to change. The numbers are increasing, but it's the rate that really is the telltale. You know, is it a rate? Is it doubling every day? Is it tripling every day? Is it quadrupling every day? So if it starts off in the early phases of the exponential, it's maybe a 1.2 or a 1.3 increase. Then it goes eventually to a 2-fold increase. Then a little more quickly to a 3-fold increase, to a 4-fold, to a 5, to a 10 in terms of the rate.
And then you're off. And then you're off to the races.
Then you're off to the races, and usually that's when you're really overwhelmed at that point. So the problem with epidemics like this is that exponential growth. And that exponential growth, you really don't end up picking up very easily until it's about to overwhelm you, until it's the tidal wave is about to hit. So the sea seems calm until the tsunami appears on the horizon. And fortunately for us in West Virginia, the tsunami has not yet appeared on the horizon. And we're hoping, as a public health measure, quarantining the state, essentially, is going to keep that tsunami from building very high, that it's going to be perhaps a tidal wave, but not a mountainous tsunami that's going to hit us.
So just to get on the ground where you are, what's it like up in Morgantown right now?
It's a ghost town. If you go out, I don't go out that often. I try to stay home. I try to do my work. And when I do have to go out for one or two minor things, I try to go out, come right back again. But you're seeing nobody on the streets because the students are all gone. They told them go home for spring break, don't come back. So there's none of that traffic. There's none of the regular traffic. It's pretty quiet. And that's what the whole state, the whole country should look like at this point. Everybody stays home all together. We will have drawn a great fire break in the line of this advancing fire. Think of all the analogies you can about this. You know? What we're doing with quarantine is we are building a fire break and hoping that the fire break is big enough that the sparks don't fly across it.
Yeah, what drives me crazy?
If everybody stays home, the sparks will fly.
What drives me crazy is some states are trying to build a fire break, but you've got Oklahoma, Texas, Mississippi, Alabama, etc., Tennessee, who are out there in a rowboat on a lake of gasoline flicking matches. At least that's what it seems like to me. When the governor of Kentucky tells the people of Kentucky, stay the hell out of Tennessee because they're doing this really wrong, that says something. And I just got a note from a friend in South Carolina who said South Carolina's governor today issued a piece of advice that South Carolinians need to, and this is a quote, stay safer.
They need to stay the hell home, and that should be the byword that everybody uses.
Another of our listeners down in Shreveport, a guy, a longtime friend of the program named Jack, came up with another slogan: 6 feet apart or 6 feet under, you pick.
Yeah.
Well,
6 feet apart, and don't share surfaces. Please don't share surfaces.
Don't share anything.
We know
right
that's
now.
bad.
Yeah. One last question before we go, because I don't think like this, but our friend Asa does. Is there any advice to give to people in dealing with these chlorine, alcohol, triclosan, so forth, as they try to keep themselves clean and keep spaces clean? Are they at any risk from these decontaminants?
Okay, if it's got an EPA seal on it, as a disinfectant and cleanser, need both of those words, okay? Disinfectant and cleanser, you're probably reasonably safe in using it. Triclosan has got some bad reputations with it. I'd stay away from it. Actually, to clean surfaces, soap and water still works really well. Chlorine bleach works well, but you should probably dilute it, something like 3 tablespoons to a quart of water if you want to use straight chlorine bleach. But chlorine wipes, perfectly fine. You can use those. Just please be careful. Don't mix bleach with anything.
Except water.
Water.
Yeah.
Don't mix it with vinegar. Don't mix it with ammonia. You can kill yourself. Don't mix it with rubbing alcohol. You can kill yourself. So the best advice is, if you got bleach, you can mix it with water and keep it at that. Or get an EPA certified cleanser and disinfectant.
So bottom line on our previous conversation...
It'll have a sticker on it.
So bottom line on our previous conversation about masks and PPE, we've already had a run on toilet paper. We've had a run on hand sanitizer. We've had a run on Clorox wipes. And now we're having a run on masks and gloves. Do you have a just rule of thumb piece of advice for people relative to masks? Because that seems to be the new frontier.
Here's the first piece of advice. If you stay the hell home, you don't need a mask. That's the simplest. Otherwise, anything beyond that, it's going to get real complicated real fast. Because no one's probably ever instructed you on how to put one of these masks on, or how to test to make sure it's working correctly, or how often you need to check your adjustments and remember you have the mask on and remember to do things in the right way. I mean, we spend hours and hours teaching workers when they have to wear PPE, how precisely to wear that, and then we watch them like hawks to make sure they do it. And that's not going to happen here if you're just going out and buying one of these things. So don't buy one of the things. Just stay home. It's that simple.
And if you've got the virus, you shouldn't be out and about anyway, which is why you would wear the mask to keep from contaminating other people.
Yes. Well, people are going to think, well, if I wear the mask, I won't get this. Well, maybe you will, maybe you won't. I mean, it's not a simple procedure to keep yourself clean when you're out. It really is not a simple procedure. And so you just shouldn't go out.
Don't go out. You know, I saw a fella. I saw a fella the other day. He was an older gentleman, jeans and flannel shirt. You know, Southern West Virginia, probably up in his 70s. Had his mask on, but he had pulled the mask down, and so that it was sitting on his mustache, but below his nose.
Yeah, of course.
And you can't say anything. I mean, what?
No, it's that. I can tell you all of the horror stories of people doing this the wrong way because these masks are uncomfortable, and your tendency is to get comfortable. Particularly when you've been out for a while and you go, "Well, I don't see anything in the air. It probably isn't here." No, not right. And the same thing is true. I mean, this is a decades-long experience with workers wearing respiratory protection.
Black lung, for God's sakes. Black lung. We can't get miners to wear their respirators in the damn mines. Even though it's the difference between life and death.
Yes.
I mean, non-compliance is
and it's only the difference between life and death here. It's only the difference between life and death here. And that's, I'm afraid, the way people might be thinking about it. It's only the difference between life and death. But it's not just your life and death necessarily. It's somebody else's. So you want to be a mass murderer? Because if you kill somebody else, chances are you've killed 3 or 4 other people along with that. Because that person has probably infected somebody else who's probably infected somebody else. So you can't put the genie back in the bottle once you've coughed it out. This is really about, are you going to be a murderer or aren't you? Yeah, it's about killing people. I can't say that forcefully enough.
Well, I don't think it will. I don't think you'll have a hard time getting that message through to this community. I hope we have a lot more luck getting through to other communities. Because you could say the fate of the nation rides upon it, does it not?
It does, for sure, absolutely. This is that you can't do hyperbole with this because the disease will out hyperbole you.
And it has the potential to be, not just the potential, it already is so godforsaken sad. And even in a place like New York, we were talking about this earlier. It's if you think about that, when you're on the roller coaster and you get to that place where the string of cars gets hooked onto the little chain that pulls you up the hill. New York just heard the ka-chunk. They're getting ready to go up the hill. And already it is as bad as it is. When you see numbers based on their current behavior, when you see numbers in Texas, the most uninsured country or an uninsured state in the country, and they're talking nearly 200,000 deaths under the paradigm with which they are working now, Dr. McCawley. It boggles the mind. It's epic. It's of epic, tragic proportions. And yet it seems that politics will trump science in this because they seem to have no intention of taking more serious measures until it's too late.
Yeah.
Or do I have that
wrong?
Well,
if you want to make America great again, don't kill it. Stay home.
There we go. Dr. Michael McCawley, I cannot thank you enough. You have given us a huge chunk of time this evening. I appreciate it more than you know. I value your friendship so very much, and thank you for all you've done over the years that helped me to get to at least a layman's understanding of some of what we've talked about this evening, and hopefully we have transmitted into the broader radio community that we have here. I cannot thank you enough, and if things get weirder, and you don't mind, and we need more explaining, I hope you'll come back and be the guy to do it.
Be happy to. The more people getting the word out, the better.
Well, as soon
as long as we know what they're talking about.
As soon as this program is over, I'm going to fire up my audio editor, and usually I just put the program out as a podcast, and everybody gets the whole program, whatever. I'm going to get my audio editor out. I'm going to carve out this conversation over about the last hour and 20 minutes, and I'm going to put it out as a discrete thing in the hopes that more people will listen to it and will pay attention to it. And again, I cannot thank you enough.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm glad to do it, and hopefully we can get the message across.
Dr. Michael McCawley, thank you so very much. Stay safe, stay well. West Virginia needs you. The nation needs you. And, well, I need you. So do take care. And I hope we'll talk soon.
Okay, Bob.
Bye now.
All right. Nice talking to you. Bye-bye.
Good talking to you. Dr. Michael McCawley of the West Virginia University School of Department of Public Health. Take him seriously. Please take him seriously. Of course, I don't have to beg y'all. But there might be people beyond the reach of my voice who are not beyond the reach of yours. Use your voices. Don't be afraid to spread the message, the necessity of be safe at home. Scott in San Diego said even a slight mind shift can help. You're not stuck at home. You're safe at home. So again, thank you to Dr. McCawley. I've been getting updates on the evening shit show from the White House. Sparky says, social distancing and staying at home are working in Washington and California, starting to flatten the curve because we started earlier than everyone else. On the other hand, David in South Carolina, Stan tells us, he just blamed New York and New Jersey for moving too slowly. They're to blame for these cases. Well, you know, everybody knows that the COVID-19 virus is killed by blame. It just dies of unbearable, intolerable shame. Sure it does. And so we've passed the halfway point of the program this evening. If you would like, and you know, I welcome, I don't say this enough, but I need to say it more. Especially in this time, we welcome new callers to the program. Share what you're feeling. You know what? If you pick up the phone and you make a call and we chat a little bit, it doesn't feel quite so much like you're stuck at home, but as that you're safe at home. I've gotten to the point where I dread going out. It's not some sort of agoraphobia or anything, but when I saw the guy with his mask pulled down, well, seeing surgical masks generally, remember, that's no more protection than the sneeze guard is over a salad bar. That was Dr. McCawley saying that, not me. But when I saw the guy with the mask pulled down, Brother Deacon Asa says, my favorite recent sight was a bunch of kids huddled outside a building with their masks pulled down to smoke. Hard to smoke with a mask. Please take this information and run with it. Thank you very kindly to Trey in Kentucky, Stan. I just had a note from Trey. He said, on a personal note, that was the best info on this virus I have heard, period. Thank you. Thank you, Trey. I'm glad you were there to hear it. Please take the information and share it. When I got to sort out where I'll probably put up the recording. I'll put up the podcast as its usual self. But I will also, like I told Dr. McCawley, I'll do a standalone. I'm going to send the MP3 to him so he can send it around if he wants to. And I'm going to try to put this up in more locations than we ordinarily do. I will put it up, of course, at White Rose. I will put it up at Podbean. Podbean goes to places, different places. I'm going to make an effort to put it up at SoundCloud, and maybe I'll take all the links and I'll send them to Brother Deacon Asa, and maybe he can hang them on the front page at headon.live. It's got to get and Dr. McCawley is a jovial and pleasant and wonderful person to be around. And so when he says, I'm a militant public health officer, it's like committing murder. That goes a long way with me. A long way. So if you'd like to talk about this, well, it's easy enough to reach the program. Bob Kincaid Horn on Skype. And then the stress line, when it works, and right now, let me just check. It's telling me that the stress line, 844-843-4676, is connected to the Bluetooth. We'll have to get a call in to find out if that's actually true. But you're welcome to share your thoughts, your reactions, your feelings. And we will continue to build that sort of community that carries us through all this. Like I've said before, I almost feel, I do. I feel like this was the moment that we had no idea when we created the Horn that this was the moment we were creating it for. But it feels an awful lot like it is. Billable Rick with a note. COVID-19 and horror movies. Given that a virus is not a living organism, to paraphrase Donald Pleasance's line from the movie Halloween, how can you kill something that's already dead? In reference to Michael Myers. And maybe it's not, based on what Dr. McCawley said, maybe we're using a little bit of the wrong language. Maybe we're talking about deactivating. Because that's what a vaccine does. That's what a healthy immune system does, is it deactivates the ability of the virus to do what viruses do. Maybe we need to get away from this idea of every problem has a solution that involves killing something. But that's, of course, just verbiage, and that's semantics. But sometimes semantics matter. Oh, my. From Mike in Cascadia. Subject line. Republican fundraiser looks to cash in on coronavirus. Where did all the masks go? Medical distributor Mike Gula ditched his lucrative Republican fundraising gig just a few weeks ago to take up medical equipment distribution, including millions of masks. What possibly could be wrong with this picture? From the Politico article. I don't want to overstate, but we probably represent the largest global supply chain for COVID-19 supplies right now, Mike Gula said. We're getting ready to fill 100 million unit mask orders. Gula is a veteran fundraiser who's raised money for more than 24 lawmakers in this cycle alone, including Senator Steve Daines of Montana, Tim Scott of South Carolina, Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania, Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, Martha McSally of Arizona, and Kevin Kramer of North Dakota. Oh, my God. I'll look at that after the program. Thank you, Mike. Thank you very kindly. Apparently, taking one for the team is Sparky. The next 2 weeks are going to be very bad, said Donnie. No, really? Again, that's that part about the uphill side of the roller coaster hill. Thank you very kindly to Anatole. Anatole jumped in and helped out with fundraising. That's very kind indeed. Thank you. And what I said earlier before I started the conversation with Dr. McCawley, yeah, that's something that really happened.
Do you know how many people there are in Seoul?
Can you imagine the background conversation that takes place before that moment happens? They are desperate to provide him with ammunition to use against the people who are trying to disseminate factual information. Okay, sir, you're probably going to get a question about our testing compared to the testing in South Korea. I think we've got you. We've got a question. We've got a way for you to handle it, sir.
Tell me about it.
Well, sir, I was just on the Google, and if you'll look here, here's the Google on Seoul, South Korea, sir. Yeah, because the little minions that flap and flock around him like a murder of crows all sound in my head like Smithers from The Simpsons, sir.
Oh, look here. Seoul, South Korea. That's a big city. Look there, 38M, 38 million.
Sir, that
38 million people in Seoul. No wonder we haven't tested as many as they have. That's huge. That's bigly.
Sir, no, the 38 million.
Yeah, how many people are there in Seoul? Yeah, 38 million. That's how many. It says right there, 38M.
38 meters. The elevation of Seoul, South Korea, above mean sea level, 38 meters. Nice, huh? And that's the president. He's doing some serious presidenting. Now, I just spent an hour and a half talking to a real live, honest-to-God expert, and one of the topics that we discussed was the viability of masks. Now, I happen to have a stack of bandanas back here behind me. You'll have to do it's theater of the mind. We're not doing video, but I got a stack of bandanas because I found them for like 25 cents a piece 3 or 4 years ago. And I like to use them. I wrap them around my head when I'm out running the weed eaters. It's just a sweatband. And by the way, I didn't issue a congratulatory note to Dr. McCawley when he took out dinner in the Central Daylight Time Zone there with his loogie reference, but it did my heart good. It's nice to know that it doesn't always have to be me. But I got some, and so you remember when, well, maybe you don't, but I remember playing cowboys and stuff like that and as a kid. And you got to wrap a bandana around your face with the pointy end hanging down there because, you were robbing the train or whatever. But I got to thinking about it. This will be the first time in probably 53, 52 years that I've wrapped a bandana around my face and gone out into public. And in fact, a few years ago, and maybe still, but I don't think it's going to be prosecuted, we had an anti-masking statute in this state that went back to the days of the coal company's oppression of workers who would mask up when they went on strike. But I thought, well, at least be funny next time I have to go out, go down to the settlements for provisions. I can put my pink bandana on, and because they were on sale. That's why they were pink. That's why they were on sale. And I can go out, and maybe I'll get a cowboy hat too. I don't know. But I mention all of this because at today's shit show, speaking of the issue of masks, and I think there's some quality information in the previous conversation with Dr. McCawley, far higher quality than the fucking stable genius had to offer. Sorry, I'm swearing now. talking about face covering, he said,
You can use a scarf. A lot of people have scarves. A scarf is good.
really? I can't wait until he comes out with a pull-up on his head.
Scarves are good. Certainly no harm.
Well, yeah, there kind of is some harm there, Nitwit Nero. Because the people who actually believe the things you say are going to think that maybe they can be asymptomatic and infected, or they can be infected but ambulatory, and they can go out and buy groceries, and as long as they've got a scarf around their face, they won't make anyone else sick, which is absolutely not fucking true. Breathing, breathing, breathing in, breathing out. Letting go now. Letting go now. Scarves. Wait a minute. I think it may be time for a daily meditation. Little meditations can be helpful. Little relaxation exercises. I remember practicing them years and years and years ago. In theater class and stuff, we'd do relaxation exercises and lay on the floor and pretend we were a piece of bacon frying or something like that. So let's check in with noted spiritual healer Marianne Williamson for her daily coronavirus affirmation. This never gets old.
The coronavirus, we pray that it be dissolved with healing, with healing, with healing. Your cervix, your penis, your vagina, your buttocks, your colon. Go wash your hands.
Well, I feel better. I don't know about you, but I do. I feel immensely better now, because everybody knows that's where you get your coronavirus from, your buttocks. No, I'm not looking for a cheap reason to say no. Ouch. True. Scott in San Diego reminding us, Klan hoods, you don't have to remind us, but probably might want to remind the Trump voters, Klan hoods don't offer COVID-19 protection either. Well, thank you very kindly. Mike in Cascadia says, congrats and thanks for that conversation with Dr. McCawley. Most informative and terrifying I have heard on the coronavirus. Terrifying is the fact that the virus can suspend in the air for hours or days. So even if we walk down the empty aisle at the store, we might be walking through clouds of virus. Yeah. Thanks again. I'm not sure if that was said tongue-in-cheek, but Mike's sincere. Thank you, Mike. Well, it's like what I said happened to me the other night, and it was one of those road to Damascus kind of moments. I had my little head lantern on, and I walked out into a foggy evening, and I could see all the itsy-bitsy little teeny tiny droplets of droplets of water suspended in the air immediately in front of my mask. See what happened? Immediately in front of my lantern, my headlamp. And I was like, damn, we're walking through that all the time. And see that, and Dr. McCawley was in on it when I came up with this notion. We were trying to figure out a way to talk to people about the ultrafine particulates in the air in the sacrifice zone of southern West Virginia. And I said, it really is this simple. What you can't see can kill you. You know, if a guy walks into the grocery store and he's got a firearm out, you know that he can kill you. Or even if he's just got it strapped on his hip, you know he can kill you. You can see him and you know he can kill you. What do you do about the person who might be asymptomatic and shedding virus for all he or she is worth, who goes galumphing through the Wally world? Spreading the virus with every breath he or she exhales. What you can't see can kill you. Scarf, says Lee in New York. He doesn't know about scarves.
Or wigs.
Wait a minute. That gets cowbell. Bill in PA. Hey, Bob, I can't wait until Donnie wears a mask of himself. Or maybe a Reagan mask. That would be good. Yeah. Okay, let's go over to the Skype line and see what's going on. Hey, welcome to the program.
Hey, Bob, Gary.
Hey, what's happening?
Oh, not much. Do I have enough time to kind of give everybody a little primer on respiratory protection?
Sure.
Okay. All right. I don't know if I misunderstood what your previous guest had to say, but I thought he said that the N95 mask was 99.97% efficient. That's not correct. I may have misunderstood him. But an N95 mask, the 95 in that N95 is the efficiency rating. In other words, there are 9 categories of efficiency ratings. You have an N mask, which is not, the N stands for not oil resistant. You have a R mask, which is oil resistant, and then you have a P mask, which is oil resistant. And then within those 3 groups, you have 3 efficiency levels: 95, the lowest, 99, and 100. And the 100 is a HEPA filter. And that's the one that's 99.97% efficient. And when we talk about efficiency, that's different than the protection factor of any given respiratory device. Okay, efficiency ratings are just dealing with the ability of filtering to stop particles coming through the filtering medium. Okay, the important thing about any respirator, okay, is its protection factor. And protection factors are assigned by OSHA. Historically, they had always been assigned by NIOSH.
Yeah, that's who Dr. McCawley worked with.
Right, and I was wondering if he knows a fellow by the name of Daryl Beavis. How long has he been with NIOSH?
Well, he retired back in 2001, and has worked as worked on his own independently ever since, including his teaching gig at West Virginia University.
Yeah, well, he may know Daryl. Daryl and this guy Daryl Beavis was my instructor for my respiratory protection instructor certification, and he was one of the original guys starting in 1960 out here in Los Alamos, who first began the research on respirators. In other words, back in 60, people made respirators, people used respirators, etc., but nobody knew how well they protected people. And these were the guys who figured out exactly how well a respirator was protecting somebody. So they essentially invented, well, I won't say invented, because the method, the most common method used today is what's called CPC, or condensate particle counting. And these guys figured it out. In other words, to figure out how well you wear a face piece, you have to count the particles outside in the ambient air, just outside your breathing zone, and then the particles inside your face piece. And these guys figured out how to do that. And so those are the machines that they actually test where your doctor friend there said, well, people have, first of all, people should got to know how to wear them properly, which is true, which is what we call fit testing. And during the course of a fit test, you're hooked up.
And that goes
you're
to
hooked up to a machine, and that machine spits out some numbers as you go through the exercises of the fit test. It spits out the numbers of exactly how well you're wearing that face piece. It's telling you the ratio between the particles that are being alternately counted from an air sample outside your face piece to a probe that goes inside your face piece, and that goes through the machine, and it does the ratio, gives you the ratio between the two, and when you come up with that number, that's called a fit factor. In other words, exactly how well you're wearing that face piece. In other words,
and it takes a considerable amount of training to accomplish all of that.
Oh yeah, I do fit testing in all my classes. I have to.
So when
respiratory protection and how to wear them.
When Dr. McCawley was talking about, just one second, when he what you mentioned early on the beginning of the conversation, Gary, when he was talking about the efficiency, he wasn't talking about the efficiency in stopping particles. He said when used correctly, they are 99.9, they are 99.7 effective in their intended use. So he was actually talking about the efficiency when used correctly, which is what you're talking about now. So the problem.
No, that's not true. That's not. None of them are 99.97 effective. They all have protection factors. Okay. The thing you have to understand about respiratory protection, okay, and this is with all respirators, is they all leak.
Yeah,
okay?
Nothing's
and
perfect.
That's not the filtering medium that I'm talking about here.
No, that's the seal and fit around your face. Seal. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay.
Yeah, that's what he was talking about with different faces and different fits.
Yeah. Two basic types of respirators, loose fitting, tight fitting. Okay. Your surgical mask, which is not part of the NIOSH regimen to begin with.
Right.
Okay, that goes under FDA or some bullshit. And that's not my world. But that's a loose fitting. Okay. That's not tight fitting. So that has a zero protection factor.
Right, and that's the point I was getting at, Gary. The people who are running around like that I see in the stores, they have surgical masks on, which Dr. McCawley described as functionally the equivalent of the sneeze guard over the salad bar. Not much in the way of protection at all.
Exactly.
So those people who are walking around with those people who are walking around with those surgical masks on in the Walmart could just as easily be walking around with a baby's pacifier in their mouth, sucking on that for the amount of good that it's going to do them.
Yeah, or a handkerchief.
Yeah. Bandana, or like Trump said, a scarf.
Handkerchief. Okay, so let me just say the protection factors, like the N95 mask, or an N99 or an N100 or P1, whatever. Okay, any of those where the filtering medium is the face piece itself. Okay. OSHA in 2006 had a rule change, and they declared, okay, that dust mask, okay, had a protection factor of 10, making it equivalent to a tight-fitting elastomeric face piece. Okay, in other words, like made of rubber or silicone or whatever, and put filter cartridges for the contaminant in your work zone. Equivalent, which is just no fucking way true. So my point here being is to have people understand an N95 mask, okay, to me, in my estimation, has a protection factor of at most 5. and let me just go through the history of this. Okay. Historically, what's called a quarter mask and the dust mask were both rated at 5. Then you get up to the tight-fitting elastomeric face piece, half face, and that had a protection factor of 10. Okay. And then your full mask had a protection factor of 50. And essentially, OSHA decided, not NIOSH. You got to remember how this all started back in the 60s. All the research and the people at primarily Los Alamos, and some out at Lawrence Livermore, and then there were a couple of universities doing some, sort of not as intense research on respiratory protection back in the early 60s. Okay. Well, the premier group was what was called Dr. Hyatt out here at Los Alamos, and his group. He was the founder of it, and so kind of, his name was sort of attached to that group. So they were doing this pure research type of thing. One that they understood would have some benefit. If we could figure out, exactly how well a respiratory device can protect somebody, we could better protect people. Well, they set the protection factors, okay, through years of research, testing, blah, blah. When the OSHA Act was passed in 1970, when it was signed into law by Nixon in 71, upon one, went into effect, I guess, and the OSHA Act did 3 things. It created OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, created NIOSH, okay, and then it created a review board, right? So those 2 groups had a mandate and a mission. OSHA, protect the workers in the workplace. NIOSH, to figure out what work tasks, okay, that are covered under the OSHA Act, okay, how hazardous they are or whatever, okay, so research. And then they took over the work of the Los Alamos group, right, simply because they now had that mandate to do the research, health effects of various work tests, blah, blah, blah. And part of that was testing and certifying respirators, testing and certifying filters and canisters, cartridges, etc., that are manufactured and submitted to them for testing and that certification process. Okay. So all those years, they never even put a dust mask into the same realm as a respirator. When everybody talked about a dust mask, that's what it was called, a dust mask, nuisance dust. Okay. When the rule change went into effect and OSHA decided to get into the business of assigning protection factors, taking it away from NIOSH, to get that dust mask tested and certified, that's the 3M, okay? 2 top people at NIOSH had to quit because they wouldn't sign off on the test that 3M came up with. And that test was basically a bogus test where they developed a cup to go over the paper dust mask so they could attach a probe so they could do a quantitative fit test. You got to remember, if your employer tells you to wear a respirator in your work area, he has to test you first to make sure you can wear that. Now, the dust masks, okay, were always dust masks. But when they did the rule change, and Darrell Beavis testified against that rule change, the laborers, I'm retired out of, all the construction crafts were up there testing against that rule change where they assigned a protection factor of 10 to a dust mask, which means if the day prior to the rule change, you were wearing a tight-fitting hat face with appropriate filter cartridges, you could have that taken away from you and be given a dust mask and told to go to work. And you couldn't do anything. You know, either that or quit your job, you know. And how many people are going to do that? But the other thing 3M did was they had developed what's called a PAPR, powered air purifying respirator, and cheap for $300. Like the ones that I have in my training fund we bought in '93, I think, and they're MSA, and they cost about $1,800. So 3M
right.
was
So
in
Emory
the process of making it.
So Emory and Marveline aren't going to get one of those.
No. But this is the thing where big corporate money, big corporate donations to Bush came in, and 3M was able to get this all pushed through. And we had 8 years of Obama, and we couldn't get this thing flipped back out, you know. But anyway, that N95 dust mask, okay, that everybody's talking about, and if you're wearing that for a full shift, you know, it essentially would have a protection factor of close to zero. Okay, and what that number means, you know, 10 for a half mask, 50 for a full mask, you know, 1,000 for an airline, 10,000 for an SCBA, you know, like the firefighters wear,
yeah,
etc. What those numbers mean is how many times cleaner the air inside your face piece will be as opposed to outside. So all it means is that for that half mask, okay, a good quality half mask, tight fitting, elastomeric, you know, is only 90% efficient itself. So there's no way, and you know, that's the protection factor. You know what I mean? At a minimum, you know, that's at a minimum. It could be better, could be a lot higher, and all of that. You know, if you got a good tight, nice tight seal going, you know what I mean? You don't stress the face-to-face piece seal during the course of your workday.
Yeah,
do pretty damn well. But that N95 mask, there's no fucking way it's going to protect you. I mean, I wore them for years out at the power plants out here, you know, on the construction crew, maintenance crews, what have you. And I used to use 4 of them a day, you know, each work segment in a normal 8-hour workday, you know, and they come back into the crew shack and take it off and blow my nose, and, you know, your nose would be loaded with coal dust and fly ash, and, you know, your boogers would be black, and you know what I mean? So that's, in other words, now here's where I'm going to be the fucking ray of sunshine here. Okay. These poor hospital workers, if they get N95 dust masks, I don't know what kind of environment they're going to be in, but I'm just guessing that an emergency room full of coughing and hacking people with COVID-19, you know what I mean?
Yep.
You're going to be in a concentration. First of all, one, you don't know what the concentration is. Number two, you know what it is, but you also know that, you know, there's some, you know, anywhere from 0.5% to 2% chance that if you get it, it might fucking kill you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So me, under the OSHA regulation, if I'm working for an employer, and I got to tell an employee, okay, you got to wear a respiratory protection for a given job, right? I have to be able to properly select the proper respirator for that employee. That person in the regulation has to be a designated person. And the position is essentially called, within the regulation, you know, your respiratory program manager, right? Now, if I'm a respiratory program manager responsible for the health and safety of that employee, and sending him out into a work zone, I got to be able to properly select what he needs to go out there. And the only way I can do that is to know what the contaminant is and what the concentration is. You know, only with that information am I going to be able to understand what I need to do. How am I going to pick the respirator? So for people in that hospital environment with this COVID, you know what I mean? I would say they all should be wearing, at a minimum, a tight-fitting elastomeric half mask, at least, with P100 filters.
Got to be able to get them.
I would never give them an N95 mask. I would never give them an N mask. It's not going to protect them. It's not going to protect them. And you got to remember, when you're wearing any type of respiratory device, you know what I mean? You're protected. That's the purpose of it. It's to protect the wearer, not people on the outside. If you have, even, I don't give a shit if you're on supplied air or an SCBA. You have an exhalation valve on that face mask. You know what I mean? You're breathing good air in, or purified air in through a filter, or your supply air tank, whatever it might be, but you're still exhaling. So if you were contaminated, you still shouldn't go out, even with an N95 type mask, because a lot of those they make with exhalation valves. They make the exhalation valve to
yeah, that's the little valve down in the corner of the front of the mask.
Seal. Yeah, not all of them have it. Some of them don't have that, but a lot of them do. And so you're breathing out. So you're protected, but nobody on the outside would be. If you had the virus, you know, and you put on that N95 with an exhalation valve, you're still breathing out. You're still exposing, potentially exposing other people. So that type of hospital environment, you know what I mean? I guess you're going to have a ward full of people with COVID-19. I would guess, you know, and if you're, you know, a nurse going through that, or a doctor going through that ward, or you're working you know, I mean, even that N95 mask isn't enough to protect you. There's no way, you know. They're so hard to keep a face-to-face people.
Right, which goes back to what he said at the end of the conversation. Mm-hmm. That is, you know, by the time you're fooling around with masks, you're already in an unacceptable risk zone. The only real hope you have is staying home and not going out, which in itself is functionally impossible. Yeah. I mean, you know, you might be able to cut it down to once every week, or if you're really good, maybe once every 2 weeks. But you can't. Yeah. It's almost impossible to cut it to zero.
My point was to say that even the N95 mask is not enough for hospital workers. That's not enough. Even the N95, it's not enough. You know, it's not going to protect them. You know, I mean, forget the surgical deal. You know what I mean? Forget that. I mean, the N95 isn't good enough to protect them either. You know, it's just no way. You know, I mean, you know, it's a nuisance dust mask. You know, it'll provide minimal health. You got to remember it has a protection factor of 10. So it means that the air inside that dust mask, you know, probably at the maximum is only going to be 10 times cleaner than the air outside. You know what I mean? So if you got 100 COVID particles in the air outside,
90
you're
getting
going to get
through.
10 of them.
Yeah, 10 of them are going to get through, yeah.
Yeah, 10 of them are getting through, not through the filtering medium. You know, 5 are getting through the milk filtering medium, potentially. You know, because it's a 95. You know, has efficiency. The filtering media has an efficiency of 95. You know, that's what the N95 like I said, stands for. People don't understand that. You know, and you know what I mean? Even if you have a P100, you know, so if somebody had a tight-fitting elastomeric face piece, a half mask, okay, they'd be even better off with a full mask because then it gives you eye protection on top of it. I mean, I couldn't, in good conscience, you know, if I was the head honcho at a hospital, tell the nurses that here's your N95. You know, everything's fucking wonderful now. That's still not the case. They're still going to get sick. Some of them are still going to get sick. You know, get the virus and get ill. You know, it's just not enough respiratory protection given the contaminant. You know, the COVID-19, and of course the concentrations. You have no fucking idea what they are.
Right, and that's in the nature of the crisis, because you know, big hospital, whatever. I mean, I experienced this 23 years ago with my mother. She was in an isolation unit, trying to keep her from getting pneumonia while she was on the vent, so that maybe she'd survive. She didn't. But when we went to visit, we had to glove and gown and mask. And we did that not because we were going to catch something from her, but to keep us from giving something to her. And in an ordinary day in, day out scenario, in a medical ICU or an isolation unit, anything like that, you've got enough stuff on hand to treat the patients that you have in your facility. But when everybody who walks in the door potentially has it, you are going to be overwhelmed, and your supply is not going to be adequate to meet your demand.
Yeah,
because you're using them at rates that are far and above what you're set up to handle. And yeah, I mean, we had the plastic, you know, with the face mask and all of that stuff 23 years ago. And you know, they had it in store for specifically those moments. But when the hospital is A, overwhelmed, overcrowded, and B, you have to change your protective equipment practically every time you turn around, the system is going to collapse, and it has in many places.
Oh yeah, well, you know, it's a sad thing, you know, when I look at it, because, you know, I'm probably in a group of people having trained with this guy Daryl Beavis, who was his Dr. Hyatt's right-hand man for all those years, you know, until they all went to NIOSH in like 73 or somewhere in that time frame. And then, of course, he retired out of there, and he's still active. I talked to him about a year ago because I was trying to figure out, look at some data on the health of the American worker, because when they made this rule change, that had an impact on people's health. The rule change basically said, corporate America says you get
get screwed
and breathe in more shit, you know. And I teach this in all my classes all the time, you know. I just do annual refreshers now. Once in a while, I do a full 40-hour asbestos course, or a 3-day AMSHA course, initial course, but that's about it. But I still remind them all. I said I want to keep reminding you guys, and I hold it up in my class every time. Same people. These are all the workers at Los Angeles. I say, which one do you want? You know, this has a protection factor of 10. Here's a fucking dust mask, or here's a tight-fitting elastomeric face piece. You know.
But you have to. But I think the really important part of what you're saying, Gary, is that you have to teach people to use these things with real specificity if they want to have.
Well, you got to teach them how to don it, how to doff it, how to inspect it. You know, I mean.
Yeah. Now imagine teaching that to 330 million people of varying degrees of intelligence. Because
it doesn't matter, you know. I mean, even a dust mask, you know, even if you know, look, a dust mask is going to be better than nothing, you know, to a certain extent. You know what I mean? I mean, I'm going to, you know, I might start wearing. We got 3 cases in my county now. We had 0 until I think yesterday, and I started thinking, and I called the health department today, both the county and the city, and they didn't know what town they were located in the county. You know, just because they told me, well, it's Edgewood. You know, all 3 cases were in Edgewood. Well, fuck, I wouldn't go up to Edgewood and go to Smith's for groceries. You know, I would just go to the local little grocery store here in town. You know what I mean? Instead of saying, well, you know, they got 3 cases up there, that's going to spread over there. You know, if there's 3 residents in that town that have the virus, you know what I mean? I would just, you know, try to avoid going to that town, you know. If I got some other alternative, you know, which I do, there's a grocery store here in town here, you know, so.
Well, you know what, we're talking here, of course, about New Mexico, and one of the most heartbreaking stories I've read in the last 24 hours is the urgent phone call that your governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham, made to the White House.
Well, yeah.
She said, she said, yeah.
It looks like.
Go ahead, please. Gary?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. You said Navajo Nation.
No, the Navajo Nation is looking like it's going to really start spiking up, you know, and you know, she was you know, warning them of that, you know what I mean? You know, it could be really, really devastating.
Yeah, what your governor said in particular.
You know, some of the, you know, and of course the Navajo.
Yeah, she said the rate of infection, at least on the New Mexico side, we're seeing a much higher hospital rate, a much younger hospital rate, a much quicker go right to the vent rate for this population, and we're seeing doubling in every day and a half, and it could wipe out those tribal nations.
Yeah,
I mean,
well, Navajo is the biggest nation. We got a bunch of other, you know, a lot of them are called pueblos. You know, different, you know, different tribes. You know.
Well, do you know what Trump's response to her when she said we could wipe out the tribal nations? You know what he replied?
No.
Wow, that's something.
Yeah, well, he's a doofus.
He's at this point, he's a dangerous doofus.
In November, you know, you just got to keep our fingers crossed on that. You know, but I look at it with my age, with all my underlying conditions. You know, I'm saying, well, shit, if I get this shit, I might be fucking toast in a hurry. You know.
Yeah.
We'll see how.
I mean, my lovely wife has a compromised immune system. I've got damaged lungs, and it's terrifying. I mean, you sit around and you contemplate things that you didn't plan on contemplating, and it's heartbreaking to do.
You know, you know, this whole N95 thing. You know, I'm among, you know, a small handful of people who understand the history of this whole N95 thing and 3M and the rule change in 2006. You know, and OSHA taking over the you know, and the reason when it was put into the regulation. What it did was it protected the employers who could now reduce the level of respiratory protection and give them legal cover. Because like a lot of people say, you know, oh, N95, well, it's got a protection factor of 10, you know. So it's the same as this other device here, you know, and that's not fucking true. You know what I mean? It's just not true. It's a fucking nuisance dust mask. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, if you're on a construction site and, you know, you're running around with a forklift and kicking up dust, you know, that's helpful. You know, if you're, you know, if you're mixing mortar, you know, for your bricklayers, you know what I mean? It's somewhat helpful. You know what I mean? It keeps you from sucking in big doses. You know what I mean? But that's about all. You know what I mean? It really can't protect you. You know, it's not going to give you 100% fucking dose. You know what I mean? But you know, it's not going to protect these hospital workers. That N95 is not going to protect hospital workers.
And it's not going to, and it's not going to protect Emery and Marveline at the Walmart either.
Well, that's not necessarily true. You know, if they put one on and they can put it on properly.
So we're back to teaching 330 million people how to do something that takes a 40-hour class to learn.
And you know, your doctor friend said, well, you got to be clean shaven. That's an absolute. You know, when I do my tests, the guys that come to take, like I think I did one almost a year ago, 40-hour asbestos class for about 10 guys up at Los Alamos, 10 or 12. And a lot of them come in sporting, you know, beards and mustaches and everything. And I tell them Monday morning, because on Tuesday I fit test them all. And I say tomorrow morning when you guys come into class, you know, you got to be clean shaven. Shave it off, you know. It'll grow back. Don't worry. You know what I mean? You know, and they usually get a little bit of resistance, but I tell them, look, you know, fuck, you don't want to shave, go home. I mean, that's what I tell them. You know, I gotta take because what I'm doing here is I'm issuing them a license. You know, it's essentially a license. You know, this is, you know, through the EPA, the licensing process. You know, and I said, oh man, I got to have a photo of you in this record. If they audit this class. This particular class, you know, and they see photos with you guys with fucking beards, you know what I mean? You know, they're going to run me out on the rail, you know? You know, how can you fit test somebody with a beard like that, you know?
Yeah,
and,
it can't be done.
But, yeah, so, you know, it'll provide, you know, a minimal amount of protection. You know, if you go into a grocery store and if you're not coughing and hacking and whatever, you know what I mean? But still,
it's terrifying.
So this is going to be their savior. You know what I mean? It ain't. It just ain't. You know, some of these people with the N95s are still going to, pick up the virus. You know, it's not going to protect them. You know, it may protect some. You know, it's all, again, it all depends on, you know, like I say, you know, you got to know what the concentration is and what the substance is, you know, before you can properly protect the worker. You know, if either of those two variables, if you don't know either one of those, you know, then, you know, you don't have a chance of protecting the worker. So I would say, as a minimum, all these hospital workers, like I would guess, emergency room or working wards where you got multiple patients with, you know, who have the disease, you know, you should have at least a full face on. Tight-fitting elastomeric face piece with P100 filters to be relatively well protected. A full face piece, you know, has a protection factor of 50, which essentially says 50 times cleaner air inside your face piece than outside. But if you properly don a full face piece, because you don't get that trouble spot, the bridge of the nose, like on the half mask. You know, you're up around above the eyes and on the forehead. You know, you can get a real good tight fit, and you could test out with exceptionally high protection or fit factors when you test. Your fit factors could go up into the thousands. So it has a capability. The reason that the protection factors are so low is because they were tested over time in a workplace setting. In other words, where you got workers in very, 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 very high exertion work tasks. People in foundries, people in construction, etc. And that's when the fit factors start to drop off because your face-to-face seal is being stressed significantly throughout the day. You may have to talk to other workers, and when you talk, you stress it. When you just have any kind of motion, movement, whatever, you stress the face-to-face seal, and therefore you end up with a standard leakage level, which again, even those elastomeric tight-fitting face pieces leak. So, but anyway, I feel for those workers. I just, hope for the best. Hope for the best. I mean, they're getting sick now.
Yeah.
More of them will get sick, and I guess there are some cases that some of the healthcare workers have contracted and died too. So that's going to continue too. In other words, they're just not being protected enough. And the reason that this is gnawing at me is because I know the fucking story of how this piece of shit dust mask got to be a protection factor 10 to begin with. You know what I mean? It should have never happened in the first place. It was grudgingly given a protection factor of 5 for years and years, and they even hijacked that term, filtering face piece, because in the past history of the industry, everybody in the industry, whenever that term was used, people understood it that people were referring to a tight-fitting elastomeric face piece. But they hijacked that term. 3M and OSHA, fucking con jobs hijacked that term to apply it to that dust masking, called the dust mask of filtering face piece. And defined it within the definitions of the regulation, because the prior respiratory protection regulation never dealt with protection factors, only substance specific, like asbestos and lead and methylbenzene bad stuff or some fucking thing. And that was it. And, but fortunately still we kept the prohibition against quarter mask and dust mask to be used in asbestos work. We kept that in the regulation for asbestos abatement. So we don't have to worry about it being taken away. But what happened with that PAPR, it had a protection factor of 50 for a full mask, which is, you got a little pack that you wear, and inside the pack you have a battery and you have your filters. And you run that, and it pulls in air through the filters and pumps it up through what we call an elephant trunk into your face piece. So it provides a little bit of positive pressure inside the face piece, but it's not a positive pressure system. It's negative pressure. And what they did was they boosted the protection factor, which was 50, up to 1,000, which now meant they could break into the supplied air market, which they had no market share at all, because MSA, Scott, North, they dominated the supply air market. In other words, airlines, air regulators, SCBAs, etc. Positive pressure, pressure demand regulators, etc. Those are dominated by, because you look around, you see the firefighters, they're either wearing MSA or Scott backpacks, and well, what it did was, again, by bumping up that protection factor to 1,000, in other words, increasing it 20 times for a piece of equipment that for 3 decades, or 4 decades, was only had a protection factor of 50. It's like, the Tooth Fairy waved your magic wand, and that piece of equipment sitting in your locker went from 50 to 1,000. Now you could be assigned to go out into higher concentrations where normally you would have to have supplied air. Okay. So that's the difference between respirators. You have air purifying. You use the air outside your face piece to breathe in, filter it through something to clean it up. But you breathe it, right? And then when you got contaminants so high in concentration or so dangerous, then you have to be on supplied air. Okay, so you have to either be on an airline or you have to have an SCBA with a positive pressure regulator. And so they were able to take a bite out of that market, see, because people would now say, well, I don't need to give you an SCBA no more. I can give you a PAP, what we call a PAPR for short.
Yeah,
Powered air
I'm looking
respirator.
at them right now.
See, and that PAPR, didn't magically get 20 times better because OSHA said so. And again, because it's stated in the regulation now, people look at that and go, well, geez, we're now 14 years out from that rule change, and that's why I talked to Daryl Beavis about a year ago, asking him, where can we try to find some fucking data on respiratory problems in this country for workers? Because it's going to start showing up, because of the fucking rule change. People giving dust masks and where they should have had a tight-fitting half mask, protection factor of 10. People who should be on supplied air who are now using the PAPR for the last 14 years.
Yeah, in fact, the CDC article I'm looking at right now makes specific references to findings by the NAS in 2006.
Yeah, that's a fucking horror show. The rule I still have the rule change on my computer. Every time I read that rule change, the final rule, I just want to fucking puke. I mean, they lied. They lied about what people testified to. They lied about fucking Daryl Beavis. They lied about what the findings of the Hyatt group were. You know what I mean? But it didn't matter. You know what I mean? It was a done fucking deal. And the driving force behind it was
the check had cleared.
And Alcoa, okay? They made big contributions to fucking Bush. And they got what they wanted, which was a tap into that supplied air market. It wasn't so much about the fucking dust mask, but what they did was okay, when you're an employer, okay, and you're going to have any of your employees wear respiratory protection, you have to test them. You have to train them and test them. Okay, fit test them. Right. So what they did was they came up with that bogus test for a dust mask. So you could quantitatively fit test them. There's 2 types of tests. Quantitative, which is you're hooked up to a machine, right, that can alternately count, what we call C sub I, C sub O. C sub I, concentration inside your face piece, C sub O, concentration outside. Okay? And that machine, predominant one is made by TSI. It's called a Port Count 2. It's a machine that I use, that we own in the training fund to quantitatively fit test people. Or you can qualitatively fit test them. You can fit test them with some type of Fitrex banana oil, irritant smoke. I use irritant smoke when I do a qualitative fit test because they react to it, and I could tell. The one of the two, and for most people, they will use a quantitative fit test. So you're hooked up to a machine. Well, to be hooked up to that machine, you know what I mean? You got to have a probe and a facepiece. You can't put a fucking probe in a dust mask. Number one, you're supposed to be tested with the piece of equipment you're going to go out into the field with. So you got to use a dummy mask and a dummy test setup. You know what I mean? And then put on a regular standard out of the box dust mask. And so they fudged, all the way around. They fudged on this fucking dust mask thing, and now they could sell all these little test kits. See, right? So people who are going to use dust masks now got to test their people, and they got to buy this fucking test kit for, I don't know, a couple of $100 or some goddamn thing. And it's a plastic cup that goes over your paper dust mask.
Yeah, and it's garbage.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate all the information, Gary. I do. We got people we got learning curves for people that they didn't know they were going to be needing to go on. I got other calls trying to get through here. I want to get to as many as we can, but I wanted to thank you. I really appreciate the depth of information, Gary.
Well, I just, I feel, you feel for those hospital workers as is, you know what I mean? But it kind of hits my gut, and I don't know if there's anything that can be done about it because they're just not being properly protected, even with an N95.
No.
It's not enough protection.
We weren't ready for this, not by a long shot. Thank you, Gary. You have a good evening and stay safe, my friend.
Okay.
All right. Bye now.
All right. Bye.
And we'll keep things rolling. I want to send out thanks to David. Thank you very kindly for jumping in and helping with fundraising here this evening. Thank you very kindly, you and Anatole both. Andrew, is that you?
I'm right here.
All right, good deal.
I wanted to switch gears a little bit, get away from the COVID for a minute. Before I do that, I want to ask you, I want to plead with you, because you're the only show I have this issue with, and that is to please try to double your mic gain. Because I can't. The way up.
I can't.
Bluetooth.
The minute that I start screwing with my mic gain, I get emails from people saying, "You're blowing my speakers up, man. You're blowing my speakers up." The problem is that, everybody has different equipment. And this different equipment happens to be really, really, really old. And so I can gain up my mic till hell freezes over, and I'll get complaints from one end, and then on the other end of the spectrum, there's folks like you who say, I can barely hear it. And the only thing that really makes a difference is if I really climb up on the mic and Freddie Mercury the hell out of it. And that may not even be that much of a difference.
You have your portable on. Because your other one you use when you're traveling, that one's great.
Yeah, it is. The only problem is.
Oh yeah, because I listened to you.
Go ahead.
Okay, I listened to you. I did the truck driver thing.
Yeah.
And I listened to you like a huge Bluetooth. It seems like sound bar. And if I have any other show I listen to, it'd blow me out of my truck, and I have it all the way up. With you, I could just barely hear you. I can hear you, but it just any other noise, and then you're drowned out.
Yeah.
So that's something you could possibly do for the future. That would be so awesome because I want to hear what you had to say.
And that will happen. There's a technical glitch here that involves the piece of equipment that I have to connect to when I fill in for Malloy. And with that little thing I use on the road, I can't do that. This thing I can. So I'm working on a workaround, and it'll eventually get better.
Because I used to have the same problem with his show, the same exact problem. And now something's happened. He did something different, and now I can hear his show. Perfect. Especially his podcast.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. I'm not an electrician and all that, but
obviously neither am I.
Well, anyway, what I like to change gears on is, have you been watching the new Picard show on CBS XF?
I've given it a couple of watches, but I haven't. I didn't go past like episode 2. I probably will, but I tend to do those things in binges.
Yep. Yeah, they got a special now for like $5 a month. First month's free. Not give us a commercial. It's a really good deal. But I brought that up. I know you're a Star Trek fan, as I am, and many others out there. I want to compare it, and with the Federation, I guess, in this time period, current time period that he's in, with, I guess, liberalism. It's going to be kind of pessimistic, but unfortunately, I can see the flaws in it, both of them. And I really hate saying this because I'm a liberal. I mean, some consider me a communist, probably. But liberalism in it's Picard's era of the Starfleet, they have severe flaws in it. And the flaw is simply this. If you get people who don't give a shit in power, they corrupt and fuck up the whole thing. Frankly, they destroy it.
Well, I mean that's kind of a historical critique of democracy as well. The attempt to have an open society ultimately is what leads to its demise. You can and interestingly, you can take that and apply it to the Athenian democracy, and then you mix in a little bit of war and a plague, and the next thing you know, bye-bye Athenian democracy. And look at the and by liberal I mean the 18th and 19th century version of liberal. Look at the liberal democracy that was the German state unified under Bismarck. Not truly a democracy, but a far cry from outright authoritarian, what we would know as fascism. The liberal democracy that eventually arises in the aftermath of the First World War falls like a house of cards, and the tools used to take it apart were the tools of an open society in the first place, and that's how that's how Hitler comes to power. What was it? Khrushchev pounded on the podium with his fucking shoe and said, "We will destroy you without firing a shot." Guess what? Here we are. And
that's what horrifies me with this whole thing with Trump and this whole, COVID-19, give him a reason to do some real horrendous things with military power and martial law and
authoritarian assholes all over the world, from Jair Bolsonaro to Eduardo Duterte to Xi Jinping to Corona Caligula, are using this as a means of consolidating power, and there's very little pushback. I mean, I was looking at the COVID map the other day, and lo and behold, the places that are in the worst shape are the places that have authoritarian right-wing governments. Germany is handling COVID a hell of a lot better than Italy. Guess what Italy has? An authoritarian right-wing government.
Of course.
Brazil is now a great big red blob.
Human race.
Well, the human race
humans that we put up with that.
We contain in ourselves the seeds of our own destruction. I think that's kind of what Dr. McCawley was getting at during part of our conversation.
Yes.
And it goes back to that thing that Ben Franklin is alleged to have said when he was asked after the Constitutional Convention, what kind of government do we have? And he said, "Madam, a democracy if you can keep, or a republic if you can keep it. Because the history of republics is that they too collapse into authoritarian rule. Authoritarian rule is a devolution. Everything devolves to it. It doesn't rise to it. You don't make a better society by having authoritarian rule. It is a downfall.
Which comes from people not giving a crap, too busy.
Or, sometimes it's not apathy. Sometimes it is the human failing that leads us to think that authority will make us safer, when all it does is make us less free. But we have a strong tendency throughout our history of being curious, panicky, hairless primates to looking to the strong man. I mean, the essence of humanity's adoption of sedentary agricultural society 7 or 11,000 years ago, or whenever it was, is it resulted in the rise of a strong man, the head man, the chief, whatever you want to call him. And he's the guy who says, okay, everybody give me some of your labor, the fruits of your labor, and we'll build this wall around the city, and I'll keep you safe. And then they have a plague, and they all die.
I guess one would think in 2020, people would know enough history to not want to repeat that. It's just astounding.
Well, no, people don't know enough history. What I just said over the course of 30 seconds is something that probably the vast majority of the American people have no fucking idea of. I mean, remember, there are more people in this country who believe in demons than who acknowledge that science is real. Okay, there are tens of millions of Americans who think that the world is a mess because Eve had a conversation with a gossipy water moccasin.
Was it about 50%, 40%? What do you see the percentages on that?
Well, what's the number on Christianity? I mean, Jesus, it's like yesterday's shit show when he brought the My Pillow guy out, and the My Pillow guy came out and said, "Oh, we're making masks, and everybody needs to go read the Bible because we got away from God, and now Trump's taking us back to God, and things are going to be great, and we need to go read our Bibles," which carries with it the unstated reality of, and all you Muslims, Jews, Sufis, Sikhs, Hindus, Buddhists, animists, and especially you goddamned atheists can go to hell. But the Christians are going to save America because they're going to go home and read their Bibles. Well, if we could get them to stay home reading their Bibles, I guess that would be good. But instead, they seem to keep having this itching desire to go and smolic and LARP on each other and rub shoulders and spread disease, and then they take it outside their churches and give it to other people.
I don't know, it'd be nice if they could do all that within their own churches and just sort of leave all the rest of us alone.
Right. But pandemics don't work that way.
But that seems to be the issue with this country, to me, is that this country is divided into thirds. You got a third authoritarians, which of course are Republicans. You got a third I consider the decent people, which are the Democrats and the liberals. You got a third of people that got their thumb up their ass with sports or video games or whatever else they're doing or trying to survive. And if we don't get enough of those people to decide, hey, it's affecting you, you need to vote, we're screwed.
Well, I divide it a little bit differently because I've got a separate subset or a separate circle on that Venn diagram that I call true believers. And they will fuck the whole world for the want of ideological purity. They are those people that we were warned against by whichever sage it was who said, "Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good."
Yeah.
And we saw that in 2016. And I guess you're just going to have that. Maybe maybe our system, by virtue of its first past the post design, makes us more likely to suffer from that kind of thing than, say, a parliamentary system where people get proportionate representation. But that's where it is. And ultimately, even in parliamentary systems, people form coalitions, and it winds up in a duality or a binary, where it's one side taking power over the other, even though you had to form a coalition to get the numbers on the one side. Israel is a classic case in point there, because you got 100 million different political parties, but if you can get enough of the weirdos all together in one space, then they can let a psychopath like Bibi Netanyahu run wild.
So that system has its severe flaws as well, then.
Yeah. I mean, all human design systems are going to be inherently flawed. And the question is, how do you guard against them? And to the extent that, I've watched a couple of episodes of Picard, I think there's a little bit of non-canonicalness to it, at least relative to the world vision that Gene Roddenberry came up with when he originally designed Star Trek as what he called wagon train in space, and that there was to be a representation of a humanity that had gotten past all of our ugly traits, or at least most of them. And you're seeing.
Well, again, it goes back to what I.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to what I originally kind of brought up originally, and that's kind of what also the other show of Discovery, that's kind of come down to what I've been hearing about in this new season. They want 50,000 years or whatever in the future, and it's kind of the same with the problem, but worse, where everything's dissolved. And what my impression is, the same as our thing. People don't give a crap. They just say, oh, whatever, go on our own world, and everything falls apart. And how do we prevent that? I mean, is there any way to prevent it in society, or are we all just screwed?
I think it's wave form. I mean, it there are peaks and troughs. I kind of like the setup to Firefly, the one season that it got. You had all this fascinating interstellar technology and space travel, and yet, there's a whole bunch of settlement planets where you wind up and they're still using horses and six-shooters. And yet they came from the same place the people in the spaceships came from. It's just that's what they had to do for subsistence living. It's a little complicated.
One side got all the technology and the power, and the other side got screwed.
Well, no, I mean, if you want to go and settle a new planet, you got to take the technology that you can leverage to get there. And everybody can't live on a planet with helium-filled pants.
Right. You do that at a lesser degree. No, that's what we're having the problem now is, like, for example, the stimulus check, for how much of a joke that is. It should be, I know somebody brought this up. Money should go to everybody with a social security number should get X amount of money, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But of course it can't be that simple. They got to throw all this other crap in there.
No, we have to make it more mean and complicated. We have to make it more mean and complicated because we have Republicans.
Right. Yeah, and how about the poor? The people who need it the most are the ones who's going to get screwed the most.
Well, I mean, the thing is, the stimulus checks aren't even going to get cold in people's bank accounts. They are an indirect means of paying the power company, the phone company, the mortgage company, the homeowner's insurance company, the whoever handles your car loan note, your car insurance, and it's not going to stretch that far.
No.
I mean, I know it may sound a little bit crazy, but from a liberal standpoint, we could have done this without cutting a single check. We could have simply said, okay, we're going to pay everybody's power bills, we're going to pay everybody's phone bills, we're going to pay everybody's mortgage, blah, 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 and we're gonna send everybody a SNAP card, and you can go to the grocery store and prop up the grocery store industry that way.
That would help the economy as well, stay afloat.
Well, it would keep the corporations, the utilities and stuff running. It would help the grocery industry. But people do need some cash. But again, we have Republicans.
The cash the most are not going to get it.
Right. But again, we have Republicans, so we have to do it the mean and shitty way. Because Republicans are mean and shitty people.
Well, and Nancy Pelosi, I love her to death, but her thinking on certain things seems to be kind of flawed to me, because her thinking is, okay, we're going to have a second stimulus thing. It's going to go out for more people. Well, the Republicans have already come out and said, hell no more money, that's it. The corporations get their money and basically screw everybody else. And can you enlighten me on this, Bob? This is, I have some crazy friends, unfortunately. They keep drinking the Kool-Aid, unfortunately. And this one chick I talked to, she tells me, Nancy Pelosi wants all this money for the Kennedy Center. What the hell's up with that? What the hell is that about?
The Kennedy Center has a power bill, too. The Kennedy Center has a water bill. The Kennedy Center has a sewage bill. Does your loopy right-wing friend think that I don't know, that some ballet company comes and makes sure the water's on and the power's on? I mean, I love ballet as much as the next guy, but I don't think they're much in the way of electricians.
Right.
At least by and large. Everything gets touched by this because we're trying to keep everything alive. It's actually an analog to what we're doing with the virus itself. We're shutting down we're shutting down a big chunk of our economy because we know that we can simply, put the paddles on it and yell clear, and it will start back up. It's not like a human being that way.
Right.
And so it's like you've heard of people being put in medically induced comas to allow them to heal. Well, we're putting the economy in a medically induced coma to a certain extent. And then we will gradually awaken the economy. The only trick is that we have enough people who are healthy enough to run it. And that's where you start running into the places where you go and read about, say, 1348 when the Black Plague arrives in Europe. Because that was so bad, it killed off a third to a half of the population of Europe, that it completely rewrote the rules of society, and that's how you get the Renaissance. Because suddenly the serfs had a little bit of power, and they weren't going to be shoved around anymore, and they decided, you know what, maybe I'd like to not be a hereditary serf. Maybe I'd like to go and learn to paint. And the next thing you know, you've got the Italian Renaissance, and the Italian Renaissance moves northward into France, Spain, Germany, England, and eventually all the way to Scandinavia. That may happen, but I doubt it. But the one of the things that I've been thinking about is if you lose, and this is the problem with comparing it to the flu or car wrecks or diarrhea or any of the other things Republicans have been comparing it to. It's the all-at-once factor. What happens, for instance, since Oklahoma, and they're the poster child right now, at least according to the COVID Act Now map, they're still red. They're doing nothing. They're just going to pray the virus away, I guess. And they're looking at 79,000 dead Oklahomans. Oklahoma is not that big a state. 79,000 dead Oklahomans will have an impact on the economy of Oklahoma. It's kind of like something that Jude sent me a little bit ago. She said, "It breaks my heart for so many, yet this reality is of another part of this pandemic. She said, my years with hospice as the on-call night nurse, all the funeral home directors became supportive and sensitive friends. We share a rare sensitivity while providing compassionate care when loved ones were removed from their homes with their loved ones present. It staggers one's mind as to what can I or we do now to be service when we're homebound, but this horrendous time is taking to the brink our first-line professionals. And so Jude, being the sweet and tender and loving soul that she is, called the funeral homes in a city, thanking them for the difficult work they're doing from the bottom of her heart. And she sent along with that a story in New York City where, remember, they're not even on the uphill side, the really uphill side of the roller coaster yet. An article from Business Insider. I followed New York City's death care workers as they collected the bodies of people killed by the coronavirus, and I saw a growing, chaotic, and risky battle. And right now, just dealing with the bodies, they're strained, but they are going to be, just like the hospitals are going to be, overwhelmed. And that's terrifying.
What is your guess on, when we're going to hear that it's killed me people in New York as 9/11?
Oh, that's not going to be long at all. The thing with 9/11 was that you had a concentrated kill zone. So that made identifying the 3,000 people kind of a different proposition. What you're going to see now is you're going to see more than 3,000 people, and it's going to be from Suffolk County and Westchester County and from the 5 boroughs and from across the river in New Jersey. And it's not far away at all. But today, Corona Caligula said that we're going to have a very painful 2 weeks. And people are already commenting that he seemed kind of stricken and sober today. Because somebody has finally explained to him what 200,000 dead people mean.
Oh, nice and comprehensive, finally.
Yeah. But see, he's being sold that 200,000 number as a good number. It's going to be painful, but if you go to that COVID Act Now website and start looking state by state at what they're facing, you get up over 200,000 in a hurry. Texas is.
What is your guess?
Texas is looking at under their present model where they're doing like voluntary shelter in place, where there's no law in place. They're looking at well over 100,000 dead.
Just in those areas.
I'm sorry, what?
Just in those areas, that's what they're looking at.
Texas, yeah, Texas is it's overload projected, voluntary social distancing, shelter in place for high risk groups, schools and bars and restaurants closed. After 3 months of social distancing, greater than 70% of the population are expected to be infected, with estimated deaths in Texas alone, 431,000 souls under their current paradigm.
So obviously, getting warmer isn't going to do crap.
No, and the jackass in the White House think, well, 200,000, it'll be very painful. And Texas is looking at an overload situation on April 29th.
So in a month is when we're looking at to see it's going to really explode.
Yeah. But then the thing is, the overload situation hits, and even though they've flattened the curve a little bit, they have not done enough to get under the overload number. And so, consequently, they're going to go up the a less steep roller coaster hill, but it's going to extend out to around June the 22nd, and that's when those 400,000 plus deaths are going to take place.
That's July, so we're looking. This thing's not going to end anytime soon.
No. This is months. This is months. But the most vigorous date put in place so far is Ralph Northam, the governor of Virginia, who has put the stay home order in place into June. Most states have not done anything nearly that aggressive. Because I think in part they know they think it's easier to just keep extending it than to do it all at once and terrify the population. Because as the constable in Young Frankenstein says, a riot is an ugly thing. And we are not my parents' generation or others' grandparents or great grandparents. We ain't ready for this, and it's made more complicated by the fact that we can't solve the problem by shooting or bombing somebody.
We got an idiot as president.
Exactly. We don't have.
Question I want to ask you.
Yeah.
Right. I want to ask you this, and I don't know if you may or may not know this answer. And if you don't, you can ask your doctor friend. I don't know if he knows or not. This is being kind of linked with, I guess, or associated with kind of the early stages of back in the 80s when the HIV thing first came out, the virus there. With this, I guess the doctor was saying that you build up some kind of immunity to it. How come that hasn't happened with the HIV virus?
I don't have an answer. Oh, and by the way, Ron in Raleigh reminds us, the federal government owns the Kennedy Center. It has to have money for the Kennedy Center. So, yeah.
So we own the Kennedy Center. If the federal government owns it, means we own it.
Yeah.
It's ours.
Yeah. That's one of our national treasures.
Yeah, that's what she kept saying. Oh, it's all this money for the Kennedy Center. Well, okay. And
I mean, what I don't know the people who saw away. I don't know. Is she afraid that the people who saw away on the violins are somehow going to make out like bandits? I sometimes I understand the Republican mindset all too well, and sometimes it just hurts my brain to think about it.
It does. It's very hurting because, well, the public, their mindset anyway is I got mine and screw you. That's their basic mindset.
Sure, and if you want to get good at predicting Republican behavior, all you have to do is ask yourself, what would a really shitty, mean, stupid person do? And bang, you've got a Republican policy. I wish it was more complicated than that. It isn't.
Well, she has to throw that both sides are horrible thing. It's like, no, that's not true. All the Republicans I consider are dicks, and about half the Democrats, I guess, are considered that way. But that's not everybody.
No, not by a long shot.
The Democratic Party is the only hope that we have.
Well, it's the only alternative. It's the only alternative to the goddamn Republicans.
Yeah, it is. And this is hypothetical. I mean, let's say everything. But hopefully, I mean, it's sad. This has got to be what's going to happen if it takes Trump out. I mean, it makes us good, but it's sad. You got to go through all this to get rid of Trump. But let's see Biden gets elected. Do you think? I mean, one thing about Hillary, for all the things that people say about her, it seems to me that she was very, she's a moderate, obviously, but she was open to suggestions. She obviously had the intelligence to know to move certain directions she needs to move. I don't know. I kind of get that sign that maybe Joe's the same way, with enough facts. He's intelligent enough to know, okay, we have to change and modernize. Do you think he'll be like that as well?
Yeah. I think as between the two, and I think some of it's a function of age, frankly. I'm worried about any octogenarian president because I don't think our system is designed for them. But that being the case, he's more likely to get it right than this guy is by a long shot. And if Hillary Clinton had been in the White House when the first inklings came out of China about this thing, she would have been all hands on deck. She's a technocrat. Yeah. She would have been on the phone to the CDC. Yeah. She would have been on the phone to infectious disease. And she would and look, we can't downplay this. The pandemic response team of the National Security Council would not have been fucking disbanded. God damn. He did that.
No, when Ebola came out, right, when Ebola came out, Obama sent people over to Africa. Trump didn't do that. Find out what's going on with it.
Well, he only done that because he's a Kenyan Muslim. And that there Kenya, it's in Africa. I'm sorry. Like I said, it's easy to do.
Yeah.
But no, again, technical competence. Because the President of the United States, as I've said for a long time now, we're not in the Abraham Lincoln or George Washington or we're talking about technocrats who are imperial administrators. They're not emperors. They are imperial administrators. And the better you understand the workings of empire, the better you're going to be at presidenting.
The problem with that is that us simple-minded Americans, we find that boring. So that was the biggest problem. Boring. Not me personally, not you.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when
have a beer with Trump.
Yeah, I remember when no drama Obama was a joke, and I remember when people who should have known better said, "Well, if he just got out on the golf course and hobnob with John Boehner a little bit more and Mitch McConnell, he might get a little bit more done," which was complete bilious horse shit. There was they said it publicly. We are not going to work with him in any way. We are not going to let him have any accomplishments. We are not going to let that one in our White House really be president.
Caucus room conspiracy.
Yeah, exactly. The day after the election.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's been great talking to you. At any rate, I gotta knock off here. Ran over a little bit, but call in anytime, all right?
I will. Bob, one last thing.
Yeah.
Trump said something totally true. Would you believe that? He actually spoke the truth. You know what he said was the truth?
I'm a dickhead?
That if he had mail-in ballots, they would never elect another Republican again.
Well, I guess that's why we won't have mail-in ballots.
Not exactly that, but that's what he meant.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. Take care, Bob.
All right, you have a good one, Andrew. Bye now. And so we come to the end of the program, and let's see. So thanks to Anatole and David, and thank you to Jude for jumping in this evening. That's most helpful. Thank you. We will start a brand new broadcast month tomorrow. I talked about learning about reverse isolation and all that stuff with my mom in the ICU there. Today would have been her 95th birthday. How about that? A few emails before we head out the door. Up in the People's Republic of the Bronx, Angelo says, Donald Trump is the 21st century version of Herbert Hoover during the crash of '29. Hoover promised prosperity around the corner. Trump promises
Death on my doorstep. These numbers are unacceptable.
No, these numbers are unacceptable. He doesn't have an answer, only excuses. In any organization, he'd be summarily fired. Yes, he would. We had that chance to do it, but we've got people who love power more than they love their country. Thank you, Republican Congress. Thanks so much. Hung Like Jesus wanted to know, hey, Bob, what are we going to call the baby boom that'll certainly happen after this isolation is done? I think we'll probably call them coronials. And then when they get to be about 13 years old, we'll call them the quarantines. Elbert in Rhode Island lets us know Moscow Mitch talked to the press today. He blamed the Democrats for helping spread the virus. He said the impeachment hearing distracted the American people. He did not say anything about the bullshit Trump's been saying. Oh, no, I saw that earlier. The funny thing is that doesn't work. That doesn't hold water with anybody except people who aren't paying attention. For instance, I got a timeline here. The Centers for Disease Control issued their first warning on January the 8th. Meanwhile, Corona Caligula held Clavern rallies on January the 9th, January the 14th, January the 28th, January the 30th, February the 10th, February the 19th, February the 20th, February the 21st, and February the 28th. He golfed on January the 18th, January the 19th, February 1st, February 15th, March 7th, and March 8th. Meanwhile, the first time that he mentioned that the coronavirus might be a problem was 18 days ago, March 13th. So, no, the impeachment didn't have any impact on the coronavirus response. Scott in San Diego says, at midnight we will have made our way through March, and what a month that it's been. In like a microbe, out like a rapidly clicking global death toll counter, and so it goes, and so it goes. Well, I think this evening was I hope this evening was a helpful program. I got good information. I hope you did as well. Thanks to all of you who keep the program on the air with your kind contributions, your subscriptions, your a la carte, however you choose. Thank you for keeping this on the air for this moment for which this network was created. Thank you to all of you who share your precious finite time engaging in the program in whatever manner you so choose. Thank you to our all volunteer staff. Thank you to Sparky and Steve. Thank you to our news ninjas. Thank you, Brother Deacon Asa, headon.live. Thank you, John Fox in Australia. Thank you, Ben Birch, whiterosesociety.org. Thanks to the hardest working, bravest people I know, the men and women of Cold River Mountain Watch, crmw.net. 20 years at the forefront of the struggle for human rights and environmental justice in Appalachia. The struggle continues. And always, 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 Gina, it's all for you. Later, y'all.